2. Rebellion. I feel the pull of your planets. I sense the tug of your stars. I know our universe consists of each other, whether on Earth, Ziggurat or Mras. I'm sure you're there waiting for me, a manifestation of destiny or fate. I believe I'm on the path where you're heading towards me, and for you I cannot wait. I'm not sure what you look like, or what species you will be, but I'll know you when I find you, the very second that I'll see. So don't stray too far away. I know we're on the right path, and we have so many experiences to share, and an awful lot of laughs. I wake in the morning feeling strange, with time all mixed up inside me, as if I was wearing several layers of mismatching clothes at once. Surely I wasn't supposed to still feel these things so brightly now, so directly. I travelled so far to try and forget all of that, to find a new set of apparel to fit a whole new body. I thought that I had said goodbye to the old me forever, or at least had found a new me that was stronger and more vivid than the old one ever was. But instead I felt myself turning inside out, the old scared anxious me forcing her way to the surface again. The last few months on Earth had been like this, after a happier beginning than I had ever expected. A feeling of restlessness, of hopelessness, that I was way out of my depth. It had faded during the month I was on the shuttle, and apart from the lull in the middle, it disappeared during the months I had spent so far on Mras. But now it hung over me again, and in the back of my mind with everything I did. I realised with a heavy heart that I had hoped never to feel it again. And yet here I was, as out of place as I had ever been. No wonder the Mrasianarts didn't want me here. This wasn't my world. I wasn't designed to be here. Even the marginally stronger gravity on this planet, which seemed such an insignificant number when researching, was beginning to take its toll on my body after my time here, leaving me with extra aches I never had on Earth. Yesterday in public I had felt strong, but that had been a passing feeling, I realised. In the here and now I felt weaker than I ever had. I wondered if I would not be better cutting my losses and saving for a one-way trip back home now. At least on Earth I was on the inside looking in, not the outside looking out. Just as I thought I had made up my mind, there was a knock at my door. I froze. Surely it wasn't another form to fill in, or an official set to yell at me again. But no, using the universal to check first, the way Auntie C had shown me, I found a familiar face smiling at me, and at once I felt better than I had all day. It was Oberon, looking rather more dapper than he had in his uniform. "Hello, it's me. I spruced myself up. I'm the ace face now, Daddy-o, a real kingpin, the chic chick. Oh, and I've got you a present," said Oberon brightly, before frowning. "I'm not sure you'll be able to play it on, though, but I thought you might like it." To my surprise, he brought out a battered old plastic case that was obviously quite old and looked not unlike a cassette. "It's Mrasianart music," he said. "I figured you probably wouldn't have been able to hear it yet, perchance. To, show you Mrasianarts aren't all that bad." "Fantastic," I said. "You look the bee's knees." No, don't ask, that really is an Earth expression, and not one I've ever understood. And I'm very happy with most Mrasianarts. It's the ones in power I'm not so keen on. I pulled out my story about the official forms. "Ignore them," said Oberon. "That's what most of us are doing. They're bound to mess up soon and be booted out at the next election. It's always happened before whenever government officials get too big for their boots." "How often are your elections held then?" I asked. "Oh, not often," said Oberon. "Just every couple of months or so." I spluttered. "Gosh, back home it's 4 years. 5 if they can get away with it by quoting some unprecedented crisis." Oberon looked shocked. "Here it used to be once a month, as well as after every crisis or big event, of course. There were 5 elections the week of Enwyn and Lizzie alone." "But don't Mrasianarts get sick of voting?" "Oh no, it's our patriotic duty. Besides, it's easy. We don't even have to vote in the way that humans seem to, judging by your very interesting class the other week. Basically, the universal reads the mood of a nation, and if a clear majority wants somebody over another, then that's who we get. Or at least it's meant to." Having grown up on late 21st century Earth, I have to admit that sounded rather a good idea to me. It would have saved humans all sorts of bloody, and indeed bloodless coups, dictatorships, fascist regimes, and then the suffering. Maybe this planet wasn't so bad after all. I invited Oberon in and fished out my MP90 player. I was sure it had an attachment device somewhere for archaic music systems, if I could find the right button. Ah, perfect. I marvelled again at how Clandusprod technology had enabled us to link up lots of devices together and play music from across the stars. "What is it?" I asked as I pressed play. Oberon seated himself opposite me, pressing his forehead into mine with intensity, and extended his insect-like antennas. "The Mrasianart equivalent of your marching bands," said Oberon. "This is a school band playing, my old school in fact. Each year you graduate you get to learn a new instrument, until by your last year you've learned to play an entire orchestra. Not many wind instruments, of course, or brass, like in your lectures, but lots of strings, and a few sounds you probably haven't heard before. Sadly they don't get to do that now. A successive number of right-wing governments have decided to take music and arts out of our schools and teach only maths and sciences. I don't see the logic myself. They might teach you how the world works, but to truly know how people work, you need to know these things. I would have loved to have learned everything eventually, of course. It's just that there never seem to be enough hours in the day to learn everything that needs to be learned, even for a long-lived species like a Mrasianart." "It was the same on my world," I said sadly. "We needed to cut funding, and the arts were an obvious thing to cut. It was a tragedy." "Absolutely," continued Oberon, infused. "Music is going to save the world one day, you know. I'm sure of that. I just hope that I get to live long enough to see it." I laughed. "I was just imagining you at my school, in short trousers and a school tie, struggling to play one of our tubas." "You look very cute in my head." Oberon looked mock grumpy. "Yes, well, enough of being up in the stars. Back on planet Mras, it seems your schools are very different to ours. Ours was a chance to meet other pupils, to swap stories and understand points of view, and learn from them as well as take up specialist skills like music. We didn't have to take any lessons we didn't want to. It was a lot of fun, and definitely no uniforms. All the rest of my education came from the Universal." "I wish I'd had the Universal at school," said Eleanor. "I'd have passed everything. No wonder so many Mrasianarts looked puzzled during my first day of lectures, if they'd never had anything like our education system before." "So what do you think of it?" I settled back into my chair to concentrate properly on the mixture of sounds swirling round the room. "It's very good. I like it. What's that twanging sound, like metal on metal?" "That's a vahoozely," said Oberon, becoming all professorial and enthusiastic. "It's usually played by the youngest classes, as it only has one note up high. More notes get added up the scale, you see, until you can play a full octave. Then you get to progress to the mahovalan. That's the swishing one that sounds like a deep harp and can play double the amount of notes. Then the third year it's the wazulibus. That's the one that sounds a bit like brass, but is really played on scraping strings with a bow. That's the year most pupils drop out, as it gets a bit harder then. Then there's a schwoozle. That's the delicate one that's a cross between a kazoo and a flute. Then right at the top is a single lone prezel fast. All our music tends to be bottom heavy, as that's where the beginners all start, and you gradually work your way up the notes, you see. And the Mrasian you can hear playing that, not at all well, is me." I raised my eyebrows. "You? I didn't know you could play." "Well," said Oberon, "it's been a while. But yes, at the risk of turning into a Belobrat, I came top of my class actually, and always hit the highest notes. To be honest, it was the only class I ever did well at. I never could get the hang of all those practical subjects." "You're so clever," I said. "You've learned so much." "Ah, but that came afterwards," said Oberon. "To be honest, I've always thought the art's more important. I mean, who cares how the world works, as long as it does, but people? To understand them, you need to learn about them through the words they write, the paintings they make, and the music they play. Now listen to this." And he blasted a merry little tune that was at the same time simple enough to thrill my ears, but complex enough to be the work of many long hours. I was impressed and told him so. "Do you have anything like this on Earth?" asked Oberon intensely. "I know it's famous for being a planet of good music. I do believe it's that as much as Enwin and Lizzie that saved your species, you know." "Oh, yes," I said, jumping up with delight and rummaging through my few meagre belongings. "Let's see, I know I had it here somewhere. Aha!" Fiddling through my bag, I pulled out my MP90 pod, which I had packed full of tens of thousands of songs before my journey. It had clearly been well played, though not recently. My new life had rather made me forget my old habits, like being on holiday. I absent-mindedly wondered to myself for the first time in ages what she always felt like when she held it in her hands. My surprise, shock and delight that the whole of my collection, by beings from around a seemingly infinite universe, could fit into the palm of my hand. I anxiously waited for it to turn itself on, marvelling for the first time at how something made so many miles away could work even here. Extending my headphones to fit over Oberon's wider head, good job I thought to pack my extendable pair, I sat cross-legged in front of him, sprawled out on my sofa and explained. This is one of my favourite albums. It's a Paul Kantner Jefferson Starship record from 1971, in which they imagine, well, kind of times now. All these mean capitalists like we used to have back in the 20th and 21st centuries went to colonise different planets, but this group of hippies won't let them. Instead they sail into the wide blue yonder to colonise it for themselves in the name of peace. They didn't know about the existence of other creatures back then, of course, though if anyone knew I reckon it would be Paul. But I like to think that us off-worlders are fulfilling the prophecy. I know he'd approve of our mixed species crossovers too. It's all very hippie. Now hold on to your hat because this is going to blow your mind. It was one of the longest sentences I had said since I had met Oberon, and he opened his eyes in surprise, first at my babble. He hadn't heard of hippies, but we sounded like yet another new species, and then at the music. He thought he had known what Earth music was like, and had laughed at most of it, especially a monstrosity called the Spice Girls, who were touring again despite a petition to send them down a black hole. But this was something new. Feedback. Piano chords. What he guessed must have been a bass super loud in the mix. And harmonies. He didn't know Earth voices could go together so well. So, said Oberon in shock, that was what guitars sounded like. I never knew anything from Earth could be so loud, or that exciting. It sure was. Could you still play a Prezelfast, do you think? I would love to see one actually being played up close. With a bit of practice I could, said Oberon. I still have it somewhere, but it's a bit battered and out of tune. If you're patient enough to let me relearn, I think I could get a few notes out of it for you. Perfect, I said. I'm not going anywhere. At the moment I said but I stopped, puzzled. Wasn't it just minutes ago that I made up my mind to go home? This infuriating planet. I come here from a rest from mine, but Mras had been even more of an emotional roller coaster ride. One day I'd love to see all of the instruments in the world being played. Oh yes, said Oberon, his big eyes glowing. I have a friend named Altair who works in an instrumental rental shop, so we would have access to any of our instruments. I could show you all of them. A lot of my Mrasianart friends play too. Maybe the other off-worlders I'm friends with have some of their own from home as well. I wonder if Auntie C has any Clandusprod instruments, for instance. Let's ask, I said, feeling much happier suddenly. Maybe I'd found my purpose at last. The Mrasianarts who had attended my lecture seemed to love Earth music, and it had, after all, saved our species from destruction before the great court case of 2112, when it was decided that humans were indeed civilized enough to join the Intergalactic Peace Federation, a decision made chiefly thanks to hearing Earth music as proof. Why not so again? We caught Auntie C as she was pottering about in the garden, wrapped in what looked suspiciously like an earthly shawl, with a sort of fluorescent tea cosy perched on her head. "Oh, my dears, come in," she said. "I've just made some tea." Heading inside, Oberon reintroduced himself, but Auntie C was having none of it. "I never forget a pair of wings. It's a Clandusprod trait, but between you and me, I'm not so good at faces. I remember you being one of the dozens of Mrasianarts kind enough to help me with my bags when I first arrived here, and I remember you from Eleanor's classes the other day. I'm pleased to see that you are making friends. Why, I remember the time." I cut her off quickly, recognising another one of those lengthy Clandusprod monologues coming on, and instead asked, "Auntie C, we were wondering if you could ask you about musical instruments on Ziggurat's Free, whether you might possibly have one to hand, or perhaps be able to play one." She looked at me funny. "Well, dear, I wasn't in the arts clan, so I don't really know how to play one. I do have some recordings somewhere if you're interested. Oh, and an actual instrument somewhere, if I can just see where I've put it. You do have to have quite big Clandusprod lungs for it." "That's truly monsterful of you, thank you," said Oberon. "Would it be hard to learn, do you think, for, say, a Mrasianart?" "I wouldn't have thought so," said Auntie C. "Not after hearing you play the guitar, anyway. Why, do you know I never saw anything like it in all my born days." "Perfect," I said. "We'll still have to arrange it with the club, of course, but how would you like to be invited to the rehearsal of the world's first intergalactic band sometime, in a couple of months or so?" "Oh, that sounds like fun," said Auntie C. "You never know, I might be persuaded to give it a go myself. Now, if only I can find it. I know it was in a pile somewhere." All that remains now is to ask my boss, Numidian, said Oberon. Eleanor, will you come with me while I ask him? So full of our brilliant new idea were we that I'd completely forgotten about the thugs milling around the town hall. But I remembered the moment I reached the corner and heard Oberon growl, "Fiddlesticks and poppycock," in my ear. To my despair it looked as if there were more people there than ever, all milling around and looking for the world like Earth youths, walking around with their hands in their pockets, even though they tended towards being old, not young, and Mrasianarts had never discovered the joy of Earth pockets. Oberon held my hand with his wing all the tighter as we walked past, and whispered to me, "The people who are always telling you to go home, it seems a bit rich that they never actually seem to be home. They're always flipping here, the knuckle-headed ninny-gaggins." I giggled at his archaic expression, without realising what I was doing, a bad mistake as it made everyone look across at us. It was eerie, probably due to the closeness they had created through the universal. We saw all their heads turn as if one, and suddenly, without warning, they all began to chase us. Oberon and I began to run, but somewhere in the mayhem we let go of each other's limbs, and I found myself sprawling headlong into one of the tiny nitrogen lakes dotted around the town centre. Oberon, I knew, was not always steady on his feet, and out of the corner of my eye I could see that he had fallen over and was sprawled on the ground. "Egad," he said to himself, under his breath, before looking over and seeing me. "Keep your head up," he shouted, visibly panicking by now, and I tried, wondering what the nitrogen would do to the oxygen in my lungs if I breathed it in. It was freezing, but otherwise much like being in a lake at home, and not so big it frightened me. I was more concerned with what had happened to Oberon. The bullies had cornered him and were taunting him about his off-world girlfriend that looked so skinny the wind would probably blow her over. One of them moved as if about to hurl a punch at him. The others moved on cue as if to do the same. Thankfully they had underestimated me and, clearly thinking me no longer a threat, had turned their backs to circle round poor Oberon. On autopilot, I reached into my own pockets for something to help me. I realised I still had a number of objects in them. My trusty MP90 player, a hardback book, a beginner's guide to Mras, and leftover fruit from my last batch of food from home. Everything seemed to keep much better in the colder air of Mras than it had back on Earth. The bullies didn't know what hit them. With 5 fierce throws, one after another, I managed to catch 5 of the bullies square in the back of the necks, which proved more by luck than skill to be a particularly vulnerable point in the Mrasianart's body. I also got out a bottle left over from my lunch and poured some of the liquid nitrogen into it, ready to aim it into the bullies' eyes if they dared try a second attack. Thankfully, much like the thugs on Earth, they scarpered, scared, without daring me to take aim with anything else. I lifted a badly winded Oberon to his feet, and he looked up at me gratefully. "My heroine," he said, weakly, handing me the MP90 that had fallen next to him. "Is the wound immedicable? I'm sorry I let you down. Mrasianarts pride themselves on being able to stay in the headspace, but I got scared and let my feelings take over me. I didn't know a human would have it in them." "Shush," I told him, pulling my player in my pocket. "Don't talk, save your strength. We're going to get you help. Tell me first, though, did you do that because it was me, or would you have done that for anyone?" "I would have done that for anyone." "Oh." For a moment there I thought we had a bond, even without use of the universal, he said weakly. "But for you I would have done anything." He smiled back at me. "Now shush, we need to get you to safety." It was too far to go back to my house, or Auntie C's, so putting his wings over my shoulder, I somehow managed to haul him down the road to his club, the Kollawallaboola, where, after the door morphed around us as usual, a number of patrons rushed to his aid. Indeed, there was an air of panic in the room now, which I had never experienced on Mras before, as half the room ran round looking after Oberon, and the rest rushed to consult the Universal on what to do best, most of them giving conflicting advice in the process. It was when 2 Mrasianarts seemed to be pulling Oberon in half by trying to get him to lie down and stand up simultaneously that something came over me and I started barking orders, something I would never have dared to do on Earth. Eventually he seemed to be recovering, thanks to bandages, drink, and a dimming of the lights. Poor Oberon. I felt quite guilty. He had been badly bruised and fallen quite heavily, which had knocked him slightly delirious. It had all been my fault, I thought wretchedly, but if he had never come to my lecture or met me, this would never have happened. I held his wing while strangers pulled, plus the odd face I recognised from my last visit, rushed around in a hive of activity, unusual for the generally more originally Mrasianarts. Partly from the shock, I felt my knees give way and joined Oberon on a bench. I had often wondered about the medical facilities on Mras, and I commented to Auntie C on what seemed like decades earlier that I had seen no doctor's surgeries or hospitals here. It turned out that this was because the Universal had made every Mrasianart a dab hand at medicine, and all houses and establishments seemed to have a ready supply of things needed in case of emergencies. It wasn't long before Oberon, bandaged and looking the worse for wear, yet far stronger than when we had come in, was smiling at me and calling his boss over. "Eleanor saved my life," he said. "There were 6 of them." Numidion blinked with a surprise that was almost human. "Really? No offence intended, lass. I'm sure you can take care of yourself, but humans are known to be the feeblest species in the inhabited universe. That's why they have so many weapons. You didn't smuggle a gun into Mras at all, did you?" I laughed. "You should see what she'd do with her lunch," said Oberon fatally. "Pow!" "Poor thing," said his boss. "He's delirious again." "No," said Oberon seriously. "She threw things. Deadly aim. She threatened them with lake water too." "Well, you're a cool customer," said Numidion with respect, clearly not noticing my knocking knees. I don't know that I'd want to take on that many of them myself." "I had to do something," I stammered. "Oberon was getting hurt, and he wouldn't have been in trouble if not for me. What's going on anyway? I thought Mras was a peaceful planet." "It's that damn bloody mother-loving military group," said Oberon with feeling, impressing me with his knowledge of earthly swear words this time. Mras, of course, not having any of its own, having no usual need for them. "I don't know what the government are up to, but they're really stirring up trouble at this moment. Luckily it's mostly the elder citizens interested, the ones who want to keep things the way they always were, before Enwyn and Lizzie came along. It's made them nostalgic for a time that only ever existed in their imaginations, and never real life, poor souls, when Mars never had to rely on anybody. Only we aren't relying on anyone, we're learning to help each other. Why can't we see that?" This was easily the longest sentence I had ever heard Oberon say, and I remembered my research told me that Mrasianarts tended to talk more when emotional. I held his wing again, his good one. "Why are they so scared of me?" Numidion snorted. "Well, if you saw off 6 of them and threatened them with nitrogen water, I'm not surprised that they're scared of you. Chances are nobody's ever done that to them before." "Before today, I mean. They keep telling me how weak I am whenever I walk past, but they're the ones who seem to be more afraid." Oberon turned to me and, painfully, reached up with his forehead so that it nuzzled against mine. "It is because they don't know you that they are afraid of you. I was nervous of off-worlders too before I met Auntie C at a grand arrival, and she was lovely to me. She even promised to knit me socks. And I was nervous of you too before I went to your first lecture. I realised that there was nothing to be scared of. That's why we must go ahead, or we work together in some form, so that we can learn from you every bit as much as you learn from us. We must spread the word." "But if they come from en masse and try to cause trouble?" I asked helplessly. "I don't have enough fruit left to hurl at a whole group of them." "And they will be entering property where they're not wanted," said Numidion. "And if they don't leave when I ask them too nicely, then it will be all round the Universal where they're troublemakers before they know what's hit them. And I will mention that an unknown number of them attacked a member of my staff. They won't like that, other people knowing what we've been up to." "Peer pressure," I said, nodding. "Sorry," said Numidion, "no peers round here, but there is plenty of pressure in a nitrogen lake. I wouldn't threaten them again with that just yet, though. It grows the grass here really well, but it's dangerous if it gets in the eyes." "Same for a human too," said Oberon, "so be careful. I'd hate anything bad to happen to you, Eleanor. Once I've recovered, I'll walk you home. Make sure you're safe." "It's more like you should get her to walk you home," said Numidion. "We'll all walk both of you home," said the other barman, "just in case. Lucky it isn't far." "And I'll stay with you," I said to Oberon, not willing to let him out of my sight. "Just in case." Oberon, it turned out, was not a natural patient. Come to that, probably no Mrasianart was. The physical violence appeared to be something so alien to the planet that nobody quite knew what to do about it. If something couldn't be solved by deep thought, Eleanor had noticed, and was outside their control, then the Mrasianarts never seemed quite sure how to handle it. 13 existential crises about philosophical implications before breakfast seemed like no problem to them. Some random event, though, seemed to set these usually laid-back creatures into a panic. To my surprise, in this crisis I found myself viewing from a distance things like a Mrasianart, surprised at how quickly this calm and generally unruffled species came unstuck during difficulties, when I seemed to forget all my anxieties at that point. In many ways it was the most human I'd seen Oberon since we'd met, as he tried to come to terms with the fact that he had really been in fear for his life. He alternated between being obsessed with his symptoms, measuring his temperature and pulse, and checking them against every previous reading he'd ever taken on the Universal, and playing things down, waving away my support and offers of help, despite the obvious pain he was still in. For long periods Oberon slept, which was also unusual in a Mrasianart, who tended to have rest periods, but never actually had set bedtimes. Mars was often billed as a planet that never slept, and insomniac-induced explorations of the Universal in the middle of the night had borne this out. With Oberon's blessings, I made myself at home in his home, or pad as he insisted on calling it. I hadn't the heart to tell him all his slang words were so out of date. In dimensions it was much like mine, only much wider, and notably not very tall, with everything crammed in any nook or cranny it would fit in. This was my first chance to see a Mrasianart dwelling up close, and I loved it. My Mrasian granddad left it to me, he had said proudly when he first entered, and got the Universal to grant me access. I'm looking after it while my parents look after him. In fact, it was less a home and more of a library, with stacks of books and more of the Mrasianart equivalent of cassettes piled sky-high everywhere one looked. Oberon had said I was welcome to read or listen to anything I fancied. As I didn't want to wake him up, I mostly read. Many of the books were on philosophy, with debates about existentialism, the meaning of life, creationism, religion. Mrasianarts seemed to believe in a team of scientists from before time who had set the universe up as a laboratory and then died out one by one before the lab rats evolved enough to read their instructions, the Mrasianart equivalent of the Holy Grail they fully expected to turn up one day, and a great deal of discussion about life after death. There had been, I quickly learnt, an intense debate in that past century about whether the presence of Enwyn and Lizzie, and the knowledge not only of life forms in the universe, but also their continued existence after death, changed the Mrasianarts' core philosophies, or not. The book I was reading, Oberon appeared to be more of a new wave thinker given the ratio of volumes on his bookshelves, thought not. Apparently Mrasianarts had long assumed the existence of both an afterlife and other intelligent life forms, if only in an academic sense, and the fact that both turned out to be true seemed to underline for the writers just how much on the right path Mrasianarts had always been. Still, having leafed through multiple volumes while waiting for Oberon to recover, it seemed clear that even the feistiest Mrasianart philosopher had been shaken by both his discoveries, and that it had left them a little dazed and unsure of their plans for the universe. For what could a race based so squarely on the idea of philosophy do with their lives, now that two of the biggest subjects they debated, the existence of an afterlife and of other creatures on other planets, had been answered so comprehensively? Only once did I feel uncomfortable or less than welcome in Oberon's home. Once, when waking up from a nap of my own, I heard voices coming from upstairs, so I went to see if Oberon had woken up, only to find him in the middle of what was referred to as the Universal Download, which tapped him into Source. He looked deeply embarrassed. This was, I found out, the Mrasianart equivalent of being seen naked accidentally, or on the toilet, neither of which were faux pas here, which took some getting used to. But I couldn't help but note the look on his face when I disturbed him, which I had never seen before. A look of great innate wisdom, of serenity, of total spirituality, of perfect peace. For the first time I found myself feeling slightly envious of Mrasianarts and the Universal, if they felt like that. Thankfully Oberon seemed on the mend after a full day and night of rest, and on the second day came to see me, where I'd sprawled myself out on his enormous sofa, a pile of books resting snoozily on my chest. After fetching him a drink and changing his bandages as best I could, I curled up next to him, feeling dwarfed by my companion and his sofa, and watched him as he tried to catch his breath. He tried to let me sleep and pretend he was asleep, but accidentally knocked over a pile of belongings. Something he did a lot, I noticed. "Sorry," he said, "that always seems to happen. I'm really not very good at being inside my own body. Through a Mrasianart." "I find it quite endearing. Poor Oberon," I said, realising suddenly that this is the first time we'd really had to talk since the accident. "I'm really sorry. You wouldn't have been attacked at all if I hadn't been there with you. I didn't realise the danger, or I'd never have walked into it." Oberon smiled at me. "It was hardly your fault. You weren't the aggressor, they were." My own people, what were they thinking? You were just there, and this is as much your world as theirs. I'm willing to say more so, given that I doubt they've contributed as much as you have already in the short time you've been here. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my neuroses suddenly returning. Then you don't hate me for what they did to you? No, said Oberon, looking horrified. But I put you in danger. I put you in danger by not taking the threats against you seriously, said Oberon. And then you got both of us out of it, quite brilliantly too, if I may say so. Is that the end of our mixed species orchestra, though? Hardly. We need it more than ever now, and it gives me something nice to think about while convalescing. It will be back on just as soon as we find a way of making it safe for our musicians. They can't touch us in the club, of course. It's Numidian's property, but we might have to find an alternative route to Kolawallabula, so we don't have a dozen off-worlders walking past them every day. Maybe smuggle the instruments in somehow, too. Oberon was lost in deep thought again. I'm really sorry you've seen such an ugly side of Mras during your time here. It's not very known internationally, but things are awfully unsettled here nowadays. All the elder Mrasianarts say it's never been like this before. But why now? I waved my hand at the pile of books I had been reading. From what I've read, it seems discovering other intelligent species have given you all a bit of a personality complex. It's all right for my planet. Humans tend to be an oddly accepting bunch, even of things said by people who should know better, and many of us already had suspicions of life out there already, given how close many of the species turn out to be. Proven facts, though, tend to be the enemy of debate, and you are a nation of philosophers. There's less for you to debate now. No wonder it's given you all a collective headache, and made some people a bit strange. But this should be a great moment in our history, Oberon cried. It's what we've been waiting for all our lives, a true answer to the many questions we've been asking. Until 100 years ago we only knew of one other race out there, and we thought that was it. And it's not as if discovering new life has ended all need for questions. There's so much more we can learn now from all of you out there. My dream is that one day everybody will be on the Universal, and we could share knowledge at will, the way Clandusprods share their technology, Mechions their scientific research, and Dewsbury Giants their cooking. It would be so incredible to hear what other races thought about the origins of the universe, or who created them, and why. His eyes glazed over. Just think how great the universe could be if we all worked together, instead of working against each other. I just don't understand how there can be beings out there who don't feel like that. It's still a shock. You haven't come to terms with it yet, I said. We didn't even know there was one race till 100 years ago, or at least we've only discovered since the Camalosians have been visiting us in secret since the 1940s, and even landed on our planet once. I don't think the universe as a whole has quite come to terms with what's happened to it yet. When Enwin and Lizzie happened, it changed so much, for all of us, all at once. It's like growing up as an only child and finding out you have 9 half-brothers and sisters you never knew about, each one of them growing up convinced that they were alone and special, and the universe had been created just for them. But it doesn't take much adjustment, really. The universe was made for all of us. We just have more siblings than we thought we had, that's all. Which means more fun. Yes, said Oberon, nodding, as well as more learning. And has it ever occurred to you just how different all these species are? Growing up in isolation has encouraged us to develop our gifts as far as we possibly could, so that when we met up we could pass on what we had learned, and have 9 other educations on how to do things in return. Well, except for humans actually, you seem to have a bit of everything. That's why, I suppose, it was a human Lizzie was destined to make contact with a century ago, because they were the species that were going to have the widest possible reaction. Be accepted on Earth, and your ideas would be accepted everywhere. Absolutely, I said, my eyes shining now. When I was on the shuttle over here, watching all the different species fill up the seats, I wanted to go up to each of them and ask about their different philosophies. I could have screamed when I found out we all had our own cabins to keep us separate. I had so hoped that we'd have travelled more between ourselves in these 100 years, said Oberon wistfully. I know that time's just the blink of an eye, really, but I still thought we would have done more with it. That all of our civilizations would rush ahead with the knowledge we gained from each other. Instead, we all seem to have stalled and fallen back into old habits. There is so much to learn from everybody, but we can't fully learn when we're kept at a distance. We need to assimilate with each other, to learn from each other properly. That's why the Universal is so good for us Mrasianarts. It helps bring us closer and makes the world seem smaller, gives us a feeling that we all matter to each other. Yes, I said. It's like back on my planet. People I knew tended to be prejudiced against someone for their gender or race or skin tone or political beliefs. And the more I got to know them, I realised it was just a fear of the unknown, or someone they never really met except in passing. Like if somebody happened to get to know someone from a different background and like them personally, then they would change their own rules just for them, say that they were the exception. It was a great unknown they were convinced were there to hurt them in some way. When the great unknown turned out to be someone they could relate to, they soon changed their minds about them. Oberon nodded. That's been in my thoughts too, and another reason why a human was chosen for the great unveiling, I think. Because humans may have been given so many differences to prepare them for the coming of different species first. That was meant to be your kind's gift. But the downside was we went and nearly made ourselves extinct so many times that our civilization's progress ended up some way behind the others, I finished. The rest of the universe has been waiting for Earth to show it the way, but instead of being the teacher, we ended up becoming the backward pupil instead. Oberon grinned widely at me. Not all of you. Not you, for instance. I really admire the way you travelled all the way here without knowing anybody. What was the phrase for use in Endurance? You're an explorer. Better an explorer than a pirate, I said, absent-mindedly quoting from Endurance, a book that had been taught so often in my classes I felt I knew it from heart, even though I hadn't read it in years, and hadn't understood a lot of it when I had. Do you know, the strangest thing is that's probably the only book we have in common, even though it seems we're both well read, said Oberon. How strange to think that it is the only basis of mutual culture we have. I would love to think that, in the future, all planets everywhere learn from the same basic texts of peace and fairness. It's a good book though, isn't it? Actually, I admitted, I got quite sick of it. They pushed it down our throats a lot at school until I hated learning it. It was too much poetry for me. And talking. Nonsense, it's a work of genius, a creative masterclass that everyone of every species should go out and buy, especially on audio. Plus it's very reasonably priced too, said Oberon. I would have loved to have explored the universe, but I would be too frightened. All that noise and chatter. Mrasianarts aren't used to travelling. Our planet is so small. Two of the reasons I made Mras my home, I said. No noise, no gossip, and I could travel anywhere in a day. It seemed like a planet you could never get bored of. What about Earth, the planet of variety, said Oberon. I would imagine there's enough to see at home to keep you going for ages. What is it they say in the intergalactic press? When you're bored of Earth, you're bored of life. I giggled. Not me. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life exploring just my neighbourhood, not when I could see everywhere else. I would travel around the entire universe if it didn't cost so much. Ah, yes, said Oberon. That's another reason Mrasianarts don't tend to travel. Our economic system ties everything up so neatly into property and belongings and food and transport given for free. It says nothing about saving up for intergalactic travel, which seems ridiculously expensive by comparison. Maybe that trend will start now, I said, or soon. Maybe it needs another Enwin and Lizzie to spur it along again. Oberon snorted in a surprisingly human way and waved his poorly wing at me. We're not likely to find another pair like that round here, sadly. I mean, look at how some of my planet reacted to you. They tried to kill you. And you. Well, I was just with you. I was incidental, really. They didn't understand me because I was spending time with you. But it was you they didn't understand. Oberon? Yes. I've just had a thought. Do you ever think in the future the 10 species, say Mrasianarts and humans, will ever have families together? That would put an end to the prejudice, surely, if there were enough of us. I fear they would just be prejudiced against the half-races instead, said Oberon gloomily. But it is a nice thought. After all, there's a Mrasianart philosopher who pointed out, I have it in a book here somewhere, that technically there is nothing to stop any of the 10 species mating. For all our differences in scale generally, the reproductive system works to the same principle and tends to be roughly the same size. There's nothing to stop there being a universe filled with every possible combination of the 10 races one day. Maybe that's why whatever god or scientist or accident with purpose created the universe left us so many empty planets to choose from, I asked, so that one day there might be enough of us to fill all of them. And don't forget, Oberon added while nodding, we only know about our part of the universe. In time we might well find another 10 intelligent races out there, and then another 10, and another 10, until we have thousands of different permutations spreading across the galaxy, all learning from each other. That thought makes me happy, I said. Me too, said Oberon, and instinctively, as if he hadn't actually noticed what he was doing, he reached out with his good wing and put it protectively round my shoulder. Soon both of us were asleep, and I was just about conscious enough to notice how nicely our different pitches of snoring seemed to be in tune. As if we were a whole orchestra already. As if we "Wake up, you slubdegillion," said Oberon later, looking 1,000,000 times better. How I envied the Mrasianart's powers of recovery. And thrusting what looked like a metal tube with holes in my face as my eyes slowly adjusted to the fact that I was still asleep on his sofa. "It's time for band practice." What? Mrasianarts, of course, don't sleep unless poorly, and seem to have little idea of how long it took for humans to wake up and come to in their surroundings. "My Prezel fast, I found it. I got you a Vahoozely to start with until your guitar gets here." "What about breakfast?" I said groggily. "You can eat and play at the same time," said Oberon. "Well, not if you're playing a wind instrument, of course, but everything else you can. Did Earth ever discover ether-platonic scales?" I don't think so. I had a feeling that was a Mrasianart invention from hearing Earth music. You know how 8 notes makes up a scale? Well, there are 8 notes for every octave. Every 8 octaves is an ether-platonic scale, and there are 8 collections of those in an octaplatonic scale. Mrasianart hearing can't hear them all, but it's proven to be subconsciously as important as anything you can actually listen to. Apparently Glabdahardits can hear all of it, or at least that's what my friend Jeremy, who I hope will join our band, says to me. But I don't think humans can hear it. On Earth, pianos only go to 6 and a bit octaves. My guitar goes to 3. I think we can hear 10 or so, though, I say woozily. We can't hear an awful lot more than that, to be honest, said Oberon, but we know the notes are there. If I'd stayed with my music studies and kept taking it through to the highest level, I would be able to play in all the octaplatonic scales. But I couldn't hear it, so I didn't see much point. If we could get a Glabdahardit in our band, though, who could play all the missing notes and have the other species fill in for us, just think how beautiful our intergalactic band would sound. That's music to my ears, I said, but breakfast has a nice ring to it too. One improvised meal based around the things left in my pockets and what I liked the look of in Oberon's larder later, and I found myself playing my first music on an alien instrument. For all of the strangeness of the instrument in my arms, which was a little like a triangle, but more malleable, with a wider range of notes, not to mention 6 sides instead of 3, and the timbre and pitch of notes I had never heard before. It all sounded strangely right, as if music was a universal language that helped us communicate and understand one another, even over and above what our Mechion language translators managed. Oberon was playing a lovely tune too. I couldn't wait to hear how my guitar would sound playing it. "Now," said Oberon after a few run-throughs, "the real test is to see if we can play along to other musicians." "Don't you think you should rest a bit more?" I asked. "Nonsense," said Oberon, and trying to pretend that the wince I'd just seen him make was some exotic Mrasianart movement. "What I need is to stretch my wing, and playing is the best way. Honest." He moved a large pile of books before I could stop him, and turned on his telescreen, was about to move channels to a music station, when we both realised that there was a live political broadcast taking place. "Crikey, the Daily Bulletin! I nearly missed it in all the excitement," Oberon said. "Do you need bulletins?" I asked. "Mrasianarts get their news through the Universal, surely." "Well, the Universal sort of chugs along taking care of itself, but if there's something the people in charge think is particularly important that we don't know, they add it in a bulletin, and then we all talk about it on the Universal afterwards and see what we think of it. Everybody watches it." "You mean it's compulsory?" "Oh no," said Oberon with a shake of his head. "I can't think of anything on Mras that's actually compulsory, but there's a few things you're frowned on if you do them. No, it's just knowing what's going on firstly in the planet, and now in the wider universe, is so important to us, none of us would ever think to miss it willingly. I've only missed 3 in my lifetime, I think, and I was very young for those. Most Mrasianarts I know haven't missed any." "Oh, I get it," I said, studying the screen which is split into 3. "This is like the news at home. Local news for the area we live in, international news for what's happening on the planet, and intergalactic news for what's happening in the universe. Who's that chap speaking now in the shadows?" "Oh, him," said Oberon with feeling. "Meet your new nemesis and our beloved leader, Almathea." This last word being said with a sarcasm that seemed odd coming out of the mouth of a species as honest and open as a Mrasianart. "He's the one who's been causing us both all this trouble. I don't know what people see in him. I wish they'd hurry up with the next election. He's just a giggle mug." I looked at him blankly. "Did I get my Earth slang eras mixed up again?" he said. "Basically, I mean an incompetent idiot. I'm amazed he can tie his own wing fasteners by himself when he gets up in the morning." The telescreen then picked out the middle box, National News, and went up in close-up with a caption, "Your brilliant President, Almathea." He was saying,
"Citizens, the latest figures are in, and they aren't good, even with the voluntary working hours. Do you realise that the Grumpfness outsold us for experts last term? Or that Mechion 5 made bigger profits than we did? Even that backwater planet Earth is catching up with us fast. We need to work better, faster, harder. As a result, I'm extending the voluntary working hours across the board so that everyone gets to take part."
"So much for being voluntary then, if everyone's taking part," Oberon sighed.
"And we expect every citizen to do his or her duty, including off-worlders."
I laughed at this as Oberon turned the bulletin off. "What am I expected to do? I'm not even in the Universal officially. Dig ditches. Why don't they just come out and kill us? Declare war on us?" Oberon looked at me seriously and intensely. They would never get that past by the Mrasianart people if they came right out and did something like that straight away. They're trying to do things more sneakily, though, in the hope that we don't notice, as we've never really had anything like that before. Somebody openly lie to us, prey on our fears and get away with it. "Eleanor, listen. That's why I'm trying to press on with the band now. If you have 2 jobs, that and your lectures, in a privately owned club, then they can't easily deport you or get rid of you, because I seriously think they will try and do it. And even though we don't know each other that well yet, I would hate to lose you." "You really think they'd send me back to Earth?" I said. "Not yet, not for certain, but I fear it's coming. For some reason this clueless so-and-so job-a-while niddy-noddy who's never met an off-worlder in his life is picking on all of you. I don't think he'll rest until Mras is back to being an isolated planet, cut off from the rest of the inhabited galaxy." "But why?" I asked helplessly. "I don't know if it's the same on Earth, but here great leaders are those who inspire and bring people together, whilst mediocre leaders make us turn on each other and break us apart. Almathea, I fear, is a rapscallion, a very mediocre leader indeed, and like all mediocre leaders, he only knows how to rule through fear or intimidation. Sadly, he's so good at it that quite a percentage of the planet haven't seen through it yet, and what he says is technically true. Our economy has dropped since Enwin and Lizzie came along, and we bought in goods from other planets without really having much to sell on in return. But we're not doing that badly, and there's been no mention of all the wonderful things being in touch with the other planets has brought us. New technology that helps us live happier, healthier, more useful lives. More art that brings us joy and understanding. More people to have conversations with that bring us new philosophical ideas to debate. The trouble is, the best we can offer to the outside universe are ideas, and you don't pay for those the way you would what the Clandusprods or the Mechions build. And we're buying things up from other planets, so of course our economy is going to go down. But really, when I read about how Mras used to be, that's a small price to pay for our longer lives, greater comforts and new understanding of how the galaxy works. It's all so short-sighted, but Almathea has enough people worried to make too many of us believe it. It was the same on Earth, I said, for a bit, before we realised just how big a demand for Earth music there was around the universe, and that we could make money from it, and then we seemed to be suddenly doing really well again, not having to pay for the upkeep of weapons anymore after signing our intergalactic peace declaration. That saved a bundle too. I'm sure it will be the same on Mars too once you've worked out through his teething troubles and found some way of exporting your philosophy. Oberon grinned at me. I think the same. Long term we have nothing to be worried about at all. But Mrasianarts do have a tendency to live in their own heads and worry inwardly, for all our desire to think rationally, and the calm demeanour we tend to give off. And in the short term, Almathea is capitalising on that worry. Then what can we do, I asked. Oberon looked thoughtfully. Even though I like to think I was always open-minded to off-worlders anyway, what really made me think things through was attending your lectures. Getting to know an off-worlder personally has changed so much for me and ended so many prejudices I didn't even know I had. And Auntie C too, she's been lovely to me. If I can get the rest of Mras to know you both, and the handful of other off-worlders on Mars, then maybe they would understand too. I can't make you a planet-famous philosopher overnight, or make you a world-class sportsman, but maybe, just maybe, we can make you a world-famous musician. If you're willing to try. I gulped. I'm not cut out to be a world-famous anything. I'm just a human who wasn't even cut out for her own planet. Oberon shook his head intensely. No, you might think that because nobody listened to what you had to say on Earth, and because humans thought they knew it all already. But you have so much to say. Mrasianarts will listen, if only they get the chance. We're an open-minded species, well, most of us. I just hope that we've got long enough to get people to listen before Almathea does something reckless and stupid, that low-down picaroon. Which gives me an idea. What are you doing tomorrow night? Nothing, I admitted. Would you still be here tomorrow evening? For an idea I have. I don't think you'd have had the chance to hear a Mrasian band in full swing. Not in person, I admitted. That would be so lovely. Oberon was still very drowsy, so he mostly stayed on the sofa, while I sat in a rather comfy armchair next to him, getting up to fetch anything he needed, and struggling to work out his instructions, even with the aid of my trusty Mechion translator. It's the Pandorica heard in the ornamental hexagonal bottle. No, not that one. That's ornate, not ornamental. Oh, it's close, but no, that's where I keep my Wazula juice out of the sunlight. And that one's not a jar at all, but a musical instrument. Now that one next to it isn't an instrument, but a statue of my mother with herbs growing out of her head. Don't ask. You'll find it soon. It's round here somewhere. Sorry, I wasn't expecting guests. I really need a tidy up. I asked if he wanted the telescreen on, and meant the same one that had been on before, but instead he grinned at me and disappeared upstairs, bringing down a box of strange-looking metallic gadgets and bright neon wires that he connected to the telescreen with a snap. Yes, he said, but I'm too ill for our state television, which is as in a state as propaganda can get right now. What you see before you is my pride and joy I bought with my wages, while everyone else was out extending their houses. As you might have seen, I'm far more interested in collecting lots of interesting things inside my house that make my life better than what it looks like to the outside world. Now this is a BCBC telescreen. It's the broadcast of a joint Belobrat Clandusprod broadcasting company that beams broadcasts around the world. It's fascinating. You get to learn all sorts about life on different planets. Well, there's no Earth on there yet, of course, which is why I was so interested in meeting you, and only the odd other Mrasian like me tunes in from here, so we don't really do much about Mras, but then I know all that already. It's the other species out there I'm fascinated by. It takes a while to warm up though, what with the light beams being broadcast from so many light years away. Oh, and the weather reports are always about 5 days out too. Goodness, I say, sitting down to watch, fascinated, as all these different light forms flicker past on the screen. It's like being on the shuttle with all of those life forms mixing, but they're all talking to each other, not lost in their own worlds the way they were on board. I love it, said Oberon, looking forward and beaming, the way he did when he was excited by something. Especially the more arty programmes. Why, I think you're in luck, Eleanor. It's the Intergalactic Song Contest tonight, with 8 different planets competing. I love seeing the planets go up against each other with all their differences. I bet the Belobrats win again, though. The other planets always give them the maximum points, just to keep on the right side of them, and stop themselves being invaded again. I looked on amazed, as one different species after another paraded across our screens, each with their own distinctive sounds and instruments. I watched as my inner translator kicked into gear mid-song, and let me know what the Glabdahardit entry, a small female, rodent-like singer dressed up in a blonde wig, was all about. There was then a long instrumental passage and what sounded like the bagpipes, a great wheezing, whining sound, but one that sounded far more tuneful and restful, as if there was a whole orchestra on stage rather than one tiny lone alien. Soon after, she left the stage and was replaced by what I recognised as a Belobrat, grandly dressed in a ruff and an alien equivalent of a smoking jacket. He walked up to the microphone, tipped his back, winked at the camera, and half screamed.
We're gonna win! We're gonna win! We're gonna win! I say this very humbly, but we're gonna win!
Is it always like this? I asked Oberon. Oh no, he said, it's always different. Last year's Belobrat entry was entitled We're the Best. They certainly know how to put on a spectacle, though. Soon the Belobrat was doing a strange little jerking dance. Before the stage seemed to be set on fire, several Belobrats came down from the roof on rope that glistened gold and roulette colours, while off stage an older-looking Belobrat baked some pastries, and a younger one seemed to be using a milk chip. It's just like back on Earth, I giggled. Don't tell me there's an alien Jedward. An alien what? Asked Oberon. I don't think I've heard of that alien species. To my shock, 2 identical-looking Mgrumps walked out, their hair sticking up from all over their bodies, before what looked like a sky backdrop. This might be interesting for you, said Oberon. They hadn't invented music till Earth was discovered. They really took to your punk rock.
Ugh, mug, moolah. We sing loud, we sing proud, we sing on a cloud. We sing even when we're not allowed. We're not cowed. Hug, mug, moolah.
After a series of repeats of his short verse, the 2 Mgrumps then got what looked like flutes out of their pocket and played them with their noses while they stamped up and down. I got the giggles. Oh, this is better than anything on the television at home, I said. Do you think I'll be able to get the BCBC in my house? You'd have to send off for the equipment first. There's an intergalactic courier service named Valdivian, said Oberon. But I can show you which ones you ought to get. Oh, that's sad. It's the final act already. This time a feathered being I recognised as a Habridat walked out. Oh, goody, said Oberon. I love Dana Intergalactic.
I rise like a Felix bird. I soar like a Muzili bird. I think like a I do Walla Walla Bird. I sing like a glass of bird.
Such a beautiful voice, said Oberon dreamily as she finished. Would you mind if I turn the BCBC set off now, Eleanor? I'm getting sleepy, and I have a few friends round later. Feel free to have a look around or do more reading. Or listening. This one's a good one. A Camalosian song. And the first part, then there's the second part, and the third part, and the fourth part, and the fifth part, and the sixth part, and the seventh part, and the eighth part, and the ninth part, and the 10th part, and the 11th, and the 12th part, and the 13th part, and the 14th part, and the 15th part, and the 16th part, and the 17th part, and the 18th part, and the 19th part, and the 20th part. Yeah. I buried myself in a book of Mrasianart poetry that recounted several myths and legends. Most of it seemed to be obsessed with the Great War. Did every species go through the same things, I wondered idly to myself? Was fighting an evolutionary ritual? Fought between the thinking Mrasianarts and the feeling Mrasianarts, who lived at opposite ends of the planet. One side tried to outfox the other with fiendish ideas and intelligence, while the other appealed to their people and used emotional reasoning to make them fight. It had been a stalemate as boundary lines of the countries Mras and Mrasianart moved up and down and left to right on a map. Eventually both sides starting adopting each other's ways of thinking, mutually saw the destruction in their path and realised that they would have been better off learning from each other instead of fighting. Both sides made a pact that they should instead set aside their differences and learn from each other, inventing the universal as a way of spreading thoughts to the feelers and emotions to the thinkers so that both sides could better understand each other. They also began to breed freely, resulting in the fact that every Mrasianart was pretty much guaranteed ancestry from both sides, which resulted in their unique combination of thinking and feeling selves. From then on, the Mrasianarts vowed to keep both sides of themselves in synchronization as much as they could and lead quieter, more spiritual lives of contemplation to atone for this long devastating period of war. A war which, I discover on the next page, lasted, in Earth terms, about 3 days. Given that in my lifetime there had only been about 3 days if there hadn't been a battle raging somewhere around planet Earth, I began to understand how these more spiritual creatures must see us. Getting to the end, I set the book down and glanced at the cover again. What a waste of time that war was. We should have skipped straight to the ending. I thought to myself what a good phrase that was for most battles on Earth too. Just as I put the book down, an Oberon began to stir himself at the noise. The doorbell rang, and he leaped up eagerly. "Colours!" he yelled with delight as he ushered everyone in and introduced us. "Thank you so much for coming." In shuffled 4 very different-looking Mrasianarts, all clutching differently shaped objects. 2 of them, Altair and Astrophel, I recognised from the Kollawalla Club, and they made much fuss over Oberon, and also of me, patting me on the back and telling me how brave I had been. Another named Belter shyly stood around before being introduced to us, while a 4th named Aliath said hello to me while undoing a great mass of what looked like scaffolding that quickly consumed Oberon's floor and led the rest of us to step back so he could fit it all into Oberon's living room. "What is it?" I asked him. Aliath grinned in much the same way as Oberon.
It's a metronomic board. All the instruments connect to it, and then it's easier for the players to stay telepathically in sync with each other, as it reads everyone's thoughts simultaneously.
"Oh, we so needed those back on Earth," I grinned back. I was forever getting my hemi-demi semiquavers in a twist. Soon the band of 5 Mrasianarts were ready. Oberon perched on the edge of his sofa, while the others all stood. It was a most beautiful sound, otherworldly and deep. The closest sound I had heard to it on Earth would be a mellotron, or its close cousin a chamberlin, with a sort of dreamy soundscape that came in layers, but with so many musicians it sounded more multi-dimensional than that, with a cascade of what sounded like bell chimes. As percussion behind, as played by Belter, the musicians played for what must have been 10 minutes as I really got into the music, which was structured more like an Indian raga than a conventional Earth song, playing faster, then slower, then faster and slower again, always the same simple pattern in the same simple key, until as one, the musicians became more daring, suddenly rushing away to a new key with wild excitement, and then another, as if exploring every part of the universe in depth, before finally coming back round to where they started. Exhausted, the musicians slumped, while I applauded. Then I explained what applause meant to me, after they all looked at me strangely. Beautiful, I said. It's like an Earth prog rock album, and an Indian raga, and the best orchestral works, all rolled into one. I told you she'd like it, said Oberon. She's a smart one with taste, as I knew her thing.
It's so good to meet an off-world with open ears,
said Altair.
The off-worlders down our music club don't always understand our music. Theirs tend to be shriller and louder.
Only the Grumps music sounds like that. The rest is quite nice, said Oberon, laughing.
Call that music,
said Altair. Don't be so closed-eared yourself. There are some lovely songs there too. I got excited at the thought of this. Is there any chance I can join this club of yours? I would love to find other musicians to play with. That's one of the things I miss about Earth the most, the chance to work in tandem with others and make something beautiful together. She's good too, said Oberon, grinning at me. Why, you should have all come to her music lectures. There are some great songs there, especially the mid-20th century ones.
I'm sure they wouldn't mind,
said Alioth.
We're all good friends, really, even if we do have quite a rivalry going on from time to time.
Have you ever played together, I asked, a thought just beginning to form in my brain.
Together, no,
said Alioth.
Would that work?
That thought began to grow. All of us different species had been used to being in competition with each other, like the Intergalactic Song Contest, but had never worked in cooperation before. Would it work, though? I decided not to say anything about it yet. Instead, I listened in whilst Oberon's friends made small talk and checked he had everything he needed, before wishing him well and saying goodbye to me. Alioth gave me a hug.
I'm so grateful you were there,
he whispered into my ear so Oberon couldn't hear.
Oberon needs looking after sometimes.
It was just instinctive, really, I blushed.
And I'm grateful for your instincts,
he nodded.
And keep them strong. There are so strange times we seem to be living in. I hope it will never happen again, but you never know.
He ended uncomfortably. Soon they were all gone, and Oberon was fast asleep again. I returned to my book. Oberon was much brighter that night, but I have a sneaking feeling he feigned a sudden bout of illness just when I said I would be on my way home, coughing and looking helpless. I agreed to stay, on the condition he save his energy for healing, not more music playing just now. Not that I needed much persuading to stay. I was aware just how much Mrasianarts needed their alone time. Oberon, though, wasn't like any Mrasianart I've met so far on this planet. Even the friendly ones at my lecture had seemed distant, as if they were only talking to me with part of their brains, and had one ear constantly on the universal, or some deep meditation I could never hope to understand. Most of them were by nature inward, guarded and thoughtful. Oberon, though, seemed to be none of those things, and as I had already seen from his library, his greatest trait was his curiosity. We spent the evening on his sofa, playing Earth and Mras music alike in the background, while he grilled me about everything I hadn't got round to in my lectures, our political system, our food and drink, our need for sleep, our courting rituals, what we did when we worked, what we did during our time off, our weather. I found myself answering questions I hadn't even begun to think of before, and found to my surprise that I was looking at my species through a whole new pair of eyes as we jumped around subjects like a psychedelic Clandusprod. I can't remember every conversation we had, but for some reason this one sticks out in my memory. Oberon said that one thing he didn't understand was our financial system. I did my best to explain, but to a Mrasianart the idea must have seemed totally, alien. So, he said at the end of my explanation, you all just shift bits of green paper around until you get what you want. Weird. Why not just do a service for someone else like we do and be done with it directly? He asked me next what happened to those who couldn't get enough green bits of paper to live off, and was horrified when I told him about the country on Earth where I had come from, all food banks and job centre sanctions and begging in the streets. Well, he said, I know that Earth is made up of lots of different countries. Yours must be one of the poorest. He looked even more horrified as I explained to him that we were one of the richest, that suffering in our real impoverished countries led to mass starvation, and often genocide, and government corruption too. This led on to a discussion of how leaders could get away with what they did, and how our penal system worked, and Oberon got more and more agitated. Surely, he said, the fear of hurting others of our own kind would have prevented us from doing anything cruel. Not exactly, I pointed out, explaining how a small few would do anything for those green bits of paper. I didn't mind who got hurt. What would happen to the victim on Earth if a crime was discovered, he asked. So I explained about compensation, community services, prison sentences, fines, of how often having a sentence on your record prevented you from getting a decent job on your release. But that's monstrous, he said, backing away from me as if I was the one held directly responsible. I mean, I'm not sure there are some humans that are just plain bad as there are Mrasianarts, but surely a lot of them do bad things because they don't have the bits of green paper everyone else has. What rights does the average human even have on Earth? You're safe as long as the law protects you, I said. And if the law is wrong, what do you do then? We change it, either by protesting about it and making a nuisance of ourselves until somebody notices us, or by electing people who vow to change it. Oberon looked bemused. Didn't you say your elections were only held every 4 to 5 years or so? That seems like an awfully elongated process for someone bad to get away with something. If you were a Clandusprod that lived more or less forever, I could understand it, but humans are so short-lived. It is, I said. It can take years for wrongs to be righted, sometimes decades, and even then many aren't. By the time you've solved one lot of injustices, there always seems to be another to take its place. That, he said, is ridiculous, overtly convoluted, wholly unnecessary, yet somehow very human. I couldn't do anything other than agree with him. I would love to visit Earth one day, though, Oberon added, absent-mindedly. Suddenly I began to feel an inner voice of panic whispering in my ear, fueled by what I had just read in Oberon's book. This is a Mrasianart I'm talking to, one of the most intelligent beings in the universe. How ridiculous I must seem to him in so many ways. I began to get panicky and unsure of myself. Earth is not what I hoped it would be, I said falteringly. Humans are a mess of contradictions. Quick to offend, slow to love, complicated even after you get to know them, and yet nowhere near as deep thinking as Mrasianarts. Somehow I wonder how we've lasted as long as we have. Maybe, said Oberon, as quick as a flash and pulling the same furrowed brow look I was growing to know so well. But you're also courageous. The wars you fought, often to find peace. We only ever had the one. The natural disasters that have hit your world so many times, and yet you've always rebuilt over and over. The poverty and hardship so many of you are born into, yet still overcome. There are so many natural predators on your world, and unlike us you haven't stamped them all out, well, apart from the Grabdyhoff monster that's still said to lurk in some nitrogates here, of course. But I can't say I'm that convinced by those stories. And all that without the belief system we have, the certainty that everything that happens is for the greater good. Eventually, that's true courage. Well, some of us do think that sometimes, but I admit it often seems to disappear quickly, all the most so when the wrong people are in charge. How do you know all this? I asked suddenly. I'm quite a student of Earth history on the quiet, especially the Earth slang, pussycat. I've been dying to know what your life must have been like. So far you, the Begrumps and the Camalosians, are the only species we don't know very well yet, and we've had visits from both of those, so you are the last big mystery to me. I was lucky enough to talk to people from both of those planets, but to talk to an actual Earthling, I never thought I would get the chance. It sounds a fascinating planet, where love and hate live on every corner, and you never quite know what to expect. Not like here, where it's all so boring. You humans live such fascinating lives every day. Maybe some of us, I said sadly, but not me. I'm mostly here to escape mine because I wasn't brave enough to live there. Escape what? Myself. But I fear you've come to the wrong place, said Oberon kindly, for you're still here. I think you're wrong, though, about yourself, I mean, moving to a new planet filled with an entirely different species so far across the galaxy. To peregrinate all that way is the very definition of brave, I would say. I certainly couldn't have done it. My interest is all from books. I'd be terrified of really going to Earth. He put his wing round me comfortingly. I know you don't see it in yourself, but you're one of the strongest people I know, of any species. To think, Eleanor, yours are the first human eyes to ever set sight on Mars. Yours are the first human legs to ever waddle down our roads. Yours is the first mind that's ever had to grapple with the differences between our two civilizations. And given how hard all that must be for you, I think you're doing brilliantly. Somehow I feel better at that, as if my new companion sensed just exactly the right thing to say to me at just the right time. Thank you, Oberon, I say. I hope I don't let my planet down. I'm sure there are other more interesting humans than me that could have arrived here and spoken up for us. I don't feel up to it somehow. Nonsense, Oberon snorted, with a primitive sound a bit like a snort that I'd never heard before, and which seemed most unbecoming to a Mrasianart. Why, I've been to 7 lectures from 6 different species, and they weren't half as interesting as yours. Really? Oh, yes. The Mechions just talked about technology and serial numbers of gadgets used back home. The Dewsbury giant, she mostly talked about food. The Clandusprod, and please don't tell Auntie C I said this as she's a darling, talked so quickly I couldn't make head nor tail of anything. The Camelosian spoke in such legalese my head was spinning trying to keep up. The Habridat basically spoke for a few minutes before falling asleep. As for the Belobrat, she only talked about herself and not her planet at all. Don't get me wrong, I love them all and still count them all my friends, but your lectures, they were special. I feel a real bond between our two cultures. We've both overcome hardship in our own way, by thinking and feeling our way through what life throws at us. I sigh contentedly. Thank you, Oberon, that makes me feel better. You know, I still can't believe I'm here sometimes. I find myself looking up at the night sky and wondering where I am in relation to Earth. I thought the constellations would look completely different, but somehow they don't. They're just back to front a little bit. I bite my lower lip. Sometimes, if I can't sleep, or something's wrong, like the town hall cutting off my lectures, I lie awake at night and pretend I'm back home, but I can hear birdsong outside my window, not hoogaloos cricketing away, and I feel at home again, until I remember what happened, but I'm no longer. Suddenly I felt myself crying. You're leaking, shouted Oberon in alarm. Are you hurt? No, at least not in that sense, I reply. It's another Earth thing. It happens when we're sad. Why, don't Mrasianarts do it? No, we don't really feel deeply in the same way you do, or let our emotions dominate our thoughts. Nor do any other species, as far as I know. How very human, said Oberon again. No other species has quite as many reasons to cry, it's true. It must be nature's way of giving you all a release. Oberon, what do you do when you're haunted by the memory of something terrible? My companion frowned for a while, lost in deep thought, as if trying to weigh up the best way to answer me. If I can put it out of my head with something good that happened, or release it with a happier experience, I do that. And if you can't, then I visit one of our tellers here and dream about happy days when the bad times will be over. Mrasianarts think everything goes in long cycles, you see, but the good and bad outweigh each other. So if you've just been through something bad, then it stands to reason that you should be cheerful, because it means that a good thing is on its way. And does it work out like that? No, he laughed. Not always. But it's so ingrained in our culture that if you're having such a bad run of luck, 2 things go wrong. Well, that must mean that 2 good things are set to follow. I think I like the Mrasianart way of thinking, I say, before pausing and reflecting on just how big my run of bad luck had been, though I can see that it would quickly become irritating. Maybe, said Oberon, but sometimes it works, and if it doesn't work, well, at least you feel better about it for a time. After all, what happens to me the week after Almathea increases my work hours and decreases my salary? I bump into you, and that makes me very happy indeed. I grin back. Are you sure? It feels as if I brought you nothing but injury and bad luck so far. Oh, said Oberon, it's not that bad now I've healed. It must have been bad, though. It took 6 whole hours before I felt well again. I think that's a Mrasianart record, or near enough. It was worth it, though, to meet you again. I really am fond of you, Eleanor, my sweeting. I'm fond of you too, Oberon, I add. One moment, said Oberon. Would you mind meeting my family? I usually call them about now on the Universal. They might have heard word of our fracas and be worried. I nod. I'd be pleased to. They're usually with my Grand Mrasianart about now. The telescreen flickered into life, and I saw the same hunched figure I'd seen at one of my lectures.
Oberon,
he said.
Are you all right? We heard on the bulletin.
I'm fine, said Oberon. I've all but healed now. It's all thanks to this human being the other side of me. Hello again, I said nervously.
Good out. I so enjoyed your lecture on, whatever it was.
She saved my life, said Oberon, as I felt strangely proud. It was nothing, I quickly add.
She saved your wife, called Dobbin. I didn't know you were married, my boy. Congratulations. You could have told me.
No, said Oberon quickly. Are Mum and Dad there? Do put them on. The Mrasianart disappeared from the screen, and two younger figures filled the screen instead, each one looking just a little bit like Oberon, but different parts of him. He had his mum's ears, but his dad's antenna, while his mother shared his frowned brow, and his father his thoughtful away in the distance look.
You're safe,
Oberon's mum said.
We're so relieved. What happened?
Was it those ruffians at the town hall? Said Oberon's dad.
They've been asking for trouble, son, ever since they started waving the Mras flag around, like they somehow think they're special, and their Mrasianarts are more special than any other. Every one of us knows that.
I'm fine. This is the human from Earth who saved me, said Oberon.
Gary Newman from birth? I think you've got a bigger bang on the head than you first thought, son. That's a nonsensical name if I ever heard one,
said the Mrasianart. She was so brave, continued Oberon, as if he hadn't noticed.
She seems to be turning red,
said Oberon's mum.
I don't know what that means in alien anatomy, but hit her on the back quick, just in case.
No, I'm fine, I say quickly. Lovely to meet you.
And you,
said Oberon's mum.
Thank you for looking after Oberon. He's so impulsive and rash as Mrasianarts go.
This was news to me, I thought, but it was true that Oberon didn't seem like the other Mrasianarts. Your son has been good to me, I said. You're the one who's been helping me heal, said Oberon, turning to me.
Helping you congeal?
Butting in the Mrasianart.
I thought only food did that.
Explain to him later, will you, said Oberon. We'd better go, but I wanted you to know I was okay.
You were playing croquet? That's an odd thing to be doing, especially if the wings are running our family.
I didn't want the bulletins to scare you, tried Oberon again.
Well, I dare you back,
said the Mrasianart. No, not dare. I'll call you later. Bye, said Oberon.
Bye? Bye what?
asked the Mrasianart, looking confused as his troubled face filled up the screen. Oberon turned to me and laughed. Thank you, I feel better now. Sorry about my Mrasianart's caducity. He gets a bit lost what's going on sometimes. He'd fit in well on Earth, I reply, especially in our parliament. It was lovely to meet your folks. I'm just beginning to recognise different ages in Mrasianarts. We tend to get taller with age and grow year by year like most species. Yours seem to stop part way. Is that because you're not fully evolved yet? That's what the Mechions say anyway. I don't think so. It's just the way we're built. Some of the thickest humans I knew were tall. Soon I found myself yawning, something which fascinated Oberon. Is that another human tick, he asked, or does your head always come apart from your body at certain hours and you've forgotten to tell me? No, I giggle, it's a sign of tiredness, and not because of the company, I might add. Is there any chance I could... Goodness me, I nearly forgot, said Oberon, rushing around. Please do forgive me. Even with all my reading, I'm not used to the routines of humans anywhere near well enough yet. You must be exhausted after yesterday's events. You too, after the way you were feeling, I said, but Oberon only laughed, showing me where all the bruises on his wings had nearly healed already. A little stiff, that's all. Now then, do humans use pillows at night at all? Bed sheets? Arquebras? I can never remember, but I think I have all three round here somewhere. Excepting the first two, with thanks, and not having a clue what the third one was. I bedded down on Oberon's sofa while he made a fuss of tucking me in before leaning down to me and whispering, I'm so glad you're here, Eleanor. You'd be worth the injuries, even if I was a human who healed slowly. You too, I reply, nearly nodding off. It was worth travelling all those millions of miles just to meet you. Sleep well, said Oberon. Oh, I almost forgot, and he reached down to take the universal device with him. I don't want you to be woken up by the next telescreen broadcast in the middle of the night. I'll be upstairs if you need me, catching up with the universal. After that I must have slept more or less immediately, full of strange dreams of walking down a strange road holding a tin whistle, and being run down by a laughing Mrasianart holding a double bass in one hand and a flag in the other, who looked quite familiar. Did you think you could hide, Eleanor? He hissed from the car as he drove round and round my body. Did you think you could run away? We're coming to find you. I sat up bolt upright and shuddered, wondering for a split second where I was. Just as I was about to call Oberon's name, I heard the burble of what must have been the late-night Mrasianart telescreen broadcast, and recognised Almathea's iron tones, flashing the image of my dream back into my mind.
We are under threat. Repercussions must be taken in light of this heinous incident. planned legislature will give natives more protection against off-worlders, all of whom should be made to follow our own laws if they are to be allowed safe passage through our land, or worse, be allowed to live here. Be on the lookout for...
I crept up to where Oberon was sitting, watching the broadcast, and looking quite miserable, before he heard me approaching at the last minute and turned the broadcast off. He put on an affected smile I could see through straight away. "Can't sleep, Eleanor? Well, I can't say I blame you." I told him about my dream. "Interesting," said Oberon. "It must be some form of latent telepathy that humans haven't evolved enough to fully work with yet. It's a bit like our universal, only more random by the sound of it. I'm a true believer that all creatures are linked in some cosmic way. Why, if we could find a way of linking the human and Mrasianart brain in some way..." "Didn't I just hear? The latest broadcast?" "Yeah, nothing much. Oh, this was quite funny. Some poor Mrasianart got a bit wet when he held a party, and had so many guests round his house expanded so far it toppled into the nearby nitrogen lake. Thankfully, nary a one was hurt." "There was a mention of an incident at the town hall. How many town halls are there on Mras, Oberon?" "Oh, just the one," Oberon shifted guiltily. "That incident could have been about any number of things." "But it was about us, wasn't it? They portrayed me as the aggressor, not the rescuer." "Yes," said Oberon plainly. "Must have been one of those wretched jingoistic thugs thinking he could throw his weight around, and shocked that he was beaten up by an unarmed human girl. Don't worry though, Eleanor. If there is an inquiry, and I'm not sure there will be, we'll soon be proved to be the innocent party. We'll just upload everybody's Universal videos, and they're impossible to alter. They'll soon see just how scared I was, and how you pretty much saved my life." I shudder involuntarily. "I'm scared, Oberon. I thought if I kept quiet, kept my head down, tried to blend in, no one would notice me, and all the trouble would go away." "It's going to be fine," he said, turning his big round eyes towards me. "You'll see." "Don't you ever get worried about anything?" I snapped at him, without meaning to. Of course I had seen him worried, when those thugs were after us at the town hall. "Sorry," I said. "I know you do. I just don't know how you Mrasianarts always stay so calm in the face of trouble." "It's an evolutionary tick," Oberon said. "Useful in a crisis, which is probably how Mrasianarts have managed to live so long. The secret is only sweating about the big stuff, not the small stuff like so many Mrasianarts seem to." "Oh, this seems pretty big to me," I said. "We're not outside with baying for blood yet, though, are they? In which case it's a little worry, one to plan and get ready for, not one to lose hope over." "I guess," I said, "it's just that I can't go back to Earth, not after experiencing Mras, not after you." I blushed again. "Your face is turning red. Is that another human tick?" asked Oberon, alarmed. "You're not about to boil your hair off or anything?" "No," I said, feeling small. "I'm just embarrassed. And scared." "Then don't be. It's not your fault but theirs," said Oberon, putting his bad wing around me, then wincing and putting his better wing around me, and hoping I hadn't seen. The next few days were the most fun I think I ever had on Mras. There were no more broadcasts to scare me. Oberon and I shared everything we loved with each other, and to my delight I soon discovered that Oberon had near enough identical taste to mine for earthly things, and me for Mrasianart things. For instance, he was the sort of person that saw through all the hype and had impeccable taste even when it wasn't what you were meant to think. He just instinctively knew from what I showed him that Stingray was better than Thunderbirds, that William Hartnell was the best Doctor Who, and that Revolver was the best Beatles album. Opinions that wouldn't always be accepted at home, even though to me they were so obviously right. In turn, he seemed pleased when I praised Mrasianart music and criticised others, listened on as he read passages from his favourite books, and showed me his favourite and his least favourite holographic shows. In between we discussed our past, our present and our future, and for all of the differences of the cultures we had grown up with, found far more that we had in common. Our worry over what the universe, and especially our planets, were turning into, despite all the good we knew there to be in the world. Our hope that change might yet happen. Our shared secret paranoia that it probably wouldn't. We talked about the people who had hurt us, those that had loved us, and we had loved in return, the people who had inspired us, those that we missed with all our hearts. We shared our favourite songs, programmes, recipes, horoscopes, philosophies, animals, memories, gods. It felt in no time as if I had known Oberon all my life. And perhaps I had, as he shared with me an idea that one of his favourite tellers had once told him on their first meeting when he was a youngster, that in order to learn more as quickly as possible, each of our souls was split into 10 and sent to all of the different planets so that they might grow up differently while remaining their true selves scattered across time. One day, though, very soon, the 10 souls would be reunited, and she knew that Oberon would meet his human one day. That, he said, is an idea I have long held close to my heart, and far more so than my peers. I've always taken an interest in off-worlders, though I've never been brave enough to be one myself on another planet. I shared with Oberon my feeling too that I had a twin out there somewhere and never been able to find them on Earth, but maybe subconsciously my sight had been turned to the stars so I could find him instead. The only awkwardness came when Oberon asked me if that was the reason why I'd come so far away. No, I admitted, embarrassed. I didn't come here to find something new so much as to forget something old, something bad that happened to me long ago, which I will tell you about when the time is right. For now, though, it's much easier just to go on forgetting. As long as I don't find out you're a secret mass murderer, Oberon quipped, was taken aback to find me sobbing. Your eyes are raining again, he said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I know that you're not. You have a good heart, Eleanor. You don't need to be using the universal to sense that. I won't ask you about it again. Instead, let's think of the future, not the past. Come, there's something I haven't shown you yet. So saying, Oberon took me gently by the hand and led me to his attic stairs, helping me up the rather wide and cumbersome steps until we were in a little room with a glass ceiling and glass walls on all sides. He led me to a seat and perched on it behind me, wrapping his rings around me. When I used to visit my grand Mrasianart, back when I was little Mraslet, this is where I used to come and stargaze, dreaming of other planets and solar systems, wondering where everybody else was. I even took a class on astronomy, which isn't something many Mrasianarts are interested in. And while I'm not very good yet, I think I can show you where Earth is. It's over there, near Betelgeuse, and the Rolling Stones Way. That feels like home, I nod. Dear me, it looks a right dump. It's all so busy and cluttered at that part of the sky. No wonder none of you species ever really noticed us. It's a wonder you hadn't spotted other life forms before the rest of us, given how nearby some of the inhabited planets were to you, said Oberon. To think we had close neighbours all that millennia without knowing it, I said. Do you know which one Ziggurat 3 is? It's over there, though you can't see much because of the 3 suns, said Oberon. It's more a bright glow in the sky. On Earth we called it the North Star, I said. There are all sorts of earthly stories about it. There's an entire religion that might have been formed around it. Maybe they were right about heavenly beings coming from there after all. There is so much out there, and our universe is so very, very big, said Oberon. We've barely explored any of it yet, it is so vast. But our leaders still act as if we're grown-ups that hold all the answers when it comes to the universe. Really, we are all still children. Why are our leaders so small-minded that they are trying to pitch us against each other? Their grievances are so small, and the universe is so vast. Just think how much there is out there to learn from. We nodded off like that, the two of us wrapped around each other and staring up at the sky, and I realised that for the first time in my life that maybe I didn't actually care that much for what was out there, or even what was happening back home. Instead, I began to care more about what was down here and what was in front of me. But would I be allowed to keep what had taken me so long and so many quadzillions of miles to find? We were at the Collar Club, where, with Oberon only half back on his feet, we were both working the same shift in the hope that between us we would count as one staff member. I was helping out wiping dishes, while Oberon was pouring drinks, when the bulletin flashed up on the telly screen. They formed a what? I said, as Oberon called me over. An anti-racism party, known as the Racists. But there is no problem with racism on Mras. Well, only those thugs at the town hall. Everyone else has been lovely. The part that gets me is that it's not to stop Mrasianarts being racist to off-worlders, it's to stop off-worlders being racist to Mrasianarts. What? But there's like 14 of us to however many million of you. And why would we come to Mras, to a whole new planet of other beings, if we were racist? I think Almathea is hiding his true motives in plain sight, if you ask me. I mean, who would accuse an anti-racist party of being racist? Just listen to this. Oberon turned the broadcast up.
Of course, as part of my policies with the Racism Party, I shall also be doing what my fellow candidate hasn't done, namely looking into the obvious subversion by the 8 foreign species who have forced their way onto this planet and their collective attempts to take our very Mrasianness away from us and to make us all the same as them. Those humans in Clandusprods and Glabdahardits and Dewsbury giants coming over here, stealing our jobs, mating with our locals, eating our food.
I looked at Oberon, who shared my same worried gaze while murmuring, "Interesting you didn't mention the Belobrat. There are more of them. That's wood mad." Other Mrasianarts who had been going about their daily business looked at each other blankly, or shrugged their shoulders while going back to their drinks as if nothing had happened. The Mrasianarts might not know it was happening, but I did. I had seen that sort of prejudice often enough on Earth. From the reaction to the telescreens alone, though, I sensed that most of the beings around me believed him, their eyes shifting uncomfortably when they met my gaze. And from what I had researched before embarking on this new life for myself, I knew that of all the 10 inhabited planets, Mras had been the most closed off after Earth. Their leaders had always acted for the common good of their own kind, and had never had any reason to lie, so there was no reason for anyone to disbelieve that speech. However, my planet had been ruled by liars and charlatans, one after another, all fighting amongst themselves, and I knew a lie when I heard one, all the more so as it was about me. "That's so wrong, we're not even allowed to have our jobs," I mouthed to Oberon in anger, and he nodded, making a quiet motion with a click of his wings as he ushered me out to the shuttle park. "Well," I exploded, "it's just an old-fashioned Earth-style nasty tricks campaign. I've a good mind to rent a video screen and give my own political party broadcast after that." "I wholeheartedly agree," said Oberon, looking uncomfortable. "I've never known anything like this, even ever, in all my years, nor can I remember anything like it from our history. It's an unspoken rule that politicians never make personal attacks. The worst they do is promise to do a better job than their rivals without giving the reasons why." I felt hollow inside, and more than a little stupid. I came to Mras because I thought it would be different to how it was on Earth, where they kept missing that precious bigger picture, with all their stupid boundary disputes and racial attacks, even after everything Enwyn and Lizzie had done to draw us closer as a galaxy. At least at home I would have been a citizen and safe. Sort of. I sighed. It was only one bad Mrasianart sent against all the rest. I genuinely did love it here, with its purple skies and night-long sunsets and beautiful cloud dust rings. The people were great for the most part. It wasn't their fault they were being lied to. And Oberon was the love of my life. I would have crossed much more than a galaxy to meet. I got my mental bearings and smiled at him. "Sorry to be so cross. I just thought it wouldn't happen again, you know." My companion sighed. "Sadly, all planets have a right, and a far right, it seems. Let's go home, Eleanor. I want something else." "Yes, you are my favourite illegal alien." "You're mine, though neither of us have strictly done anything illegal, have we? Do you know I haven't even seen our nemesis's face yet? I've only heard his voice," I said. "Whose?" asked Oberon, a puzzled look fleeting across his face. "Almathea. It's good to know who your enemy is." "Oh, that niffing. I wouldn't worry. One Mrasianart looks much like another to a human, I should think." "No," I said, "not to me. Never to me. It's humans who look alike sometimes if I don't know them very well, but I can tell all of you apart. The different rolling waddles, the variety of intense stares, the hue of your fur. I know I've only met maybe a dozen or so Mrasianarts for any length of time, but you are all so different, and you are the most different of all. I can't put my finger on what it is, but I'm more curious than the Mrasianarts, perhaps." "Yes, that must be it. The others seem so closed off, shut off, not like I thought they'd be from my research. Oh, I knew you were a race of introverts, which is partly why I came, but you all seem so separate." "We are, I suppose, at least compared to humans. We get most of our contacts from the Universal, and I have a feeling that even with the very best of Mechion technology translating everything for you, that would be a hard thing to understand." "Yes, it is. Sometimes this planet feels very alien. Tonight especially." Oberon grinned at me kindly. "But you are on an alien world, silly. Did you think it would be like going on holiday a few miles away? It's a whole new world that grew up entirely different to your own. I have to say, though, I admire you for doing it. I don't know if I'd have had the strength to come to another world and leave everything behind. To be honest, I'm beginning to wonder if I have. I don't feel as if I'm being welcomed with open wings here." "Only because most Mrasianarts don't know you yet. They're as much of a mystery to them as we are to you. Remember that. Everything's going to be fine, though, Eleanor. As soon as you went to sleep, I went to consult my favourite teller, and you know what she said, that we would have the best of all possible outcomes after a few painful obstacles, and be blissfully happy with good news very soon. Is she accurate? Oh, very. She predicted me getting my job and meeting a small, not very dark stranger with a time only hours off when it all came true. It's all going to be fine. More than fine. It's all going to be brilliant. Totes amazeballs, in fact. Really? It's something you should know, Eleanor. When it comes to intuition, Mrasianarts are never wrong. But what about the Mrasianarts outside the town hall? I countered. Don't tell me they were right about deporting me and beating you up. Well, not wrong as such. It's just that sometimes we act before having all the data. We're not wrong based on things we actually know. I sighed. Then I hope you have all your data, because I have a bad feeling about all this. Oberon hugged me tight. Talking of data, as much as I'd love to hide you away, I really do think the best thing to do, if you're brave enough, is to get your message out there, to show my fellow Mrasianarts what a truly remarkable, wonderful, brave human being you are. I hugged Oberon back, wondering if anyone feeling this scared could ever be wonderful, brave, or remarkable. Later that day, as I was falling asleep in his wings, Oberon clicked his broadcasting machine back onto the tune of a jingle. And spoke softly in my ear. You asked me earlier why I was different, Eleanor. I think it's because of this. I was a radio actor in my youth. When Clandusprod technology first came in, I begged my parents for a Ziggurat booster crystal wireless set that gave me access to all the radio transmissions around the galaxy. Well, all of them except Earth, sadly. I was dying to know what you sounded like, as I'd heard so much about how good your music was, and I'm not disappointed. But all 8 other inhabited planets. I don't think I was meant to have it really, but it didn't do me any harm. In fact, it did me so much good. All those different worlds out there, all those different lives. I came to love them all, and it shook me that no one else was interested. I mean, exploring new worlds and finding out new philosophies, isn't that what Mrasianart life is all about? The problem is that everyone else here is so terribly insular sometimes. Anyway, through this little device I heard so much and had access to so many worlds. When I heard an off-worlder from Earth was giving lectures, I was so excited. And other Mrasianarts will be too, I know it, if we can just tell them you're there. Snuggling sleepily up to Oberon, I smiled and dozed off to 6 alien, yet comfortably familiar sounds. That of a glad-to-hearted housewife asking the galaxy the best way to multitask and keep their house clean without having to leave the table they were hiding under. A soap opera involving an everyday story of mechions that seemed terribly dry and factual somehow. A Clandusprod knitting special. A Belobrat play that seemed to be called I Think I Am, Therefore I Am, and How, Look Out World. And a Dewsbury giant asking for help after getting stuck in his own doorway. The world suddenly seemed a much bigger, brighter place than my own small problems, and I drifted off into much happier sleep, with Oberon as my pillow, and the world as my duvet. I slept much better that night, and didn't stir until Oberon finally shook me awake. Auntie C is here, he said. How did she find us? I asked groggily. She looked me up on the Universal, probably. Come on down. So saying, Oberon all but leapt down the stairs, leaving me to worry. I'd been scared about going back to my own house after the news bulletin, but figured that as Oberon and me hadn't been named, I might be safe hiding out here. If Auntie C could find me, though, maybe someone else could too. I shuddered. Making my way downstairs, I heard Auntie C giving one of her monologues. Yes, I still have my letter from Lothian young Mrasianart. I found it hanging on my wall amongst all my other knickknacks, but I don't think you'll be able to play it. Clandusprods have a lot of puff, and a scrawny thing like you would just gill right over. Anyway, I don't see what all this has to do with you and E. She was all over the bulletins, though weirdly they gave her name as Eleanor. Honestly, I let her out of my sight for 2 minutes, and the next thing I know she's being hunted by security guards. You should be taking more care of her. There you are, dear, she said as I walked my way down the last few stairs, waving her hands maniacally. You're not hurt? bruised, broken bones, lacerations, abrasions, contusions, blood transfusions, fainting fits, coughs, hiccups, acne, flu, measles, mumps, heart arrhythmia, ME, long COVID, hunger pains, labour pains, growing pains, broken heart. She looked sheepish as the two of us just stared at her, perplexed. All right, so I looked up human physiology on the Universal last night, just in case. What a complex system the human body is. I hugged her. No, I'm fine. It was poor Oberon here who got quite mangled. It was awful though, Auntie C. I really thought they wanted to kill us. Hush, my child, you're safe now. Well, I think you are. They aren't really coming after you, are they? I didn't leave them here, did I? Oh dear. Oh, Hans. Oh dear. And with that, Auntie C put 2 of the 3 hands up in the air, while the other 2 absent-mindedly started knitting a scarf, which she started winding round Oberon's head. It's all right, said Oberon. I was doing a lot of deep thinking last night. We're safe here in the short term if we stay out of sight. As you know, nobody's allowed into my house unless I authorise it, and I'm not blooming well going to authorise it to anyone but you 2 and my friends and family. In the long term I have a different sort of an idea, which is where your mytholodium comes in if you can bring it here. Auntie C looked nonplussed. Is Clandusprod music really that bad? You want me to annoy the neighbours? No, said Oberon, laughing. I'm rather partial to a Clandusprod Klug or 3 myself. I've got much bigger designs than that. I just hope that my friends get the message, that I can pull a few strings of the BCBC via the intergalactic message I've just sent. Who did you send it to? I asked. Oberon grinned. Only the Intergalactic Peace Federation, that's all. They run a channel on the BCBC that promotes the idea of togetherness around the universe. I thought it important they knew what was happening here, so I asked them to send a delegate to investigate my complaints. I've also asked if they'd be interested in a little demonstration I hope to broadcast sometime in the future. For now, though, I've done all I can, and the next bulletin is starting, and we better keep an eye on things. Oh, and Eleanor, I do believe this is where you get to see our beloved leader's face for the first time.
Dear citizens, it is I, your noble leader, here to discuss allegations that I've wallpapered my apartment with your money. Clearly this is all lies, spread by people who wish me ill and want to stop this glorious run of policies we have for you. After all, am I, your wonderful ruler, who has brought you so much fulfilment and riches through my policies, destined to live in a skip?
Thankfully, Oberon and I weren't mentioned again, and this bulletin was more a diatribe against supposedly fake allegations made on the Universal, and Almathir's threats to shut it down. I was unimpressed by Almathir, to say the least, disliking him on first sight, and that dislike only grew with time as I studied him. He looked oddly blonde for a Mrasianart, who all tended to be dark in complexion, and his hair stuck up in strange places, as if it was so scared of what was going on in his head it wanted to break away from it as soon as possible. He was older than any of the Mrasianart I had seen so far, with the exception of Oberon's Grand Mrasianart, his face full of wrinkles from frowning too hard. He also looked quite unlike any Mrasianart I had ever seen, fat, oddly stupid, and with a gleam of meanness in his eyes. He gave the impression of someone who had only just woken up, yet had probably spent all night plotting. His demeanour was trying its best to be genial, as he waved his arms like a buffoon, but every so often a harsh stare or a display of teeth would give his real intentions away. Though trying to act as everyone's friend, Almathir was clearly the kind of person who thought nothing of how many enemies he made, or how badly he would destroy his friends if it became useful to him. Where most other Mrasianarts smiled with a friendliness, he smiled with a smugness. Where other Mrasianarts talked about us, he talked about me. Where other Mrasianarts looked towards the future with faith, whether it be through natural optimism or fortune-telling, he grumbled about the present and moaned about the past. One other alarming factor was that he smiled in all the wrong places, as if he was enjoying his own private conversation but had little or nothing to do with what he was actually saying. The sign of someone who knew what he was saying wasn't true. In the media coverage it was assumed he was particularly drawn into the Universal, but it didn't feel like that to Eleanor. Instead he seemed to be schizophrenic, reacting to an agenda he was keeping to himself. For the most part he kept it hidden, but occasionally the mask would slip and he would grin broadly when delivering sad news like a rise in deaths or a fall in work availability. At other times he would look crestfallen at happy news, like an intergalactic peace treaty being signed — there have been a lot of those the past 100 years — or the delivery of some new Mechion technology that helped make everyone's lives easier. He was also the one politician who never followed the Mrasianart tradition of humility and apologies, begging their electorate's forgiveness for any slight reduction in figures. Once, in the split second before the telescreens were properly rolling, she even caught him smirking to himself, and she had never ever seen another Mrasianart even come close to a smirk, ever. It seemed such an unlikely, self-satisfying, indulgent thing for a Mrasianart to do. On Earth I would have dismissed him readily as a confidence trickster, out for nothing more than to save his own skin, with none of the pride or responsibility I felt from the other Mrasianart politicians. In the short time I had been here already, I had heard him make one U-turn after another, promising one thing and delivering the opposite, while all the time talking as if he was merely fulfilling his nation's wishes. Somehow, though, he was convincing enough for seemingly all the rest of the Mrasianart population to be swayed. I looked with despair at my companions. He so reminds me of a sleazy human politician. How have so many people been fooled by him?
I know, dear, said Auntie C, apologetically knitting. Things weren't like this on the planet when I first got here.
It is ignorance, pure and simple, said Oberon. All three of us here know how deceptive politicians can be. Auntie C because you've travelled, me because I've read up on different planets, and Eleanor because humans have lived through the regimes of some of the most evil tyrants that ever existed across the universe, whose names are still feared now centuries on. Napoleon, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Donald Trump, David Cameron, Ian Duncan Smith, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss. But most Mrasianarts don't have that luxury, or even understand the concept that politicians can lie. That's seen as such a human, and maybe a Mechion thing.
Yes, dear, said Auntie C. It's not that Almathir is afraid of us, as he seems to say, more that he's afraid of us seeing him for what he really is, and telling other people.
And let's tell everyone, said Oberon, starting tonight. It's time for me to put my excogiate into action. The rest of the day was a hubbub of activity, at least for Oberon. Auntie C and I spent it studying her mytholodium, which turned out to be a sort of portable organ but had a rather angelic shimmering tone to it. I had last seen it hanging on a kitchen wall, and had long assumed it was some sort of fancy Clandusprod decoration. Auntie C showed me where she had adapted it for her travels.
On Ziggurat 3 it's powered by solar energy, but of course that wasn't going to work on a planet like Earth. How do you creatures even see each other? It's a little easier on Mras, but it still needs to be plugged into the Universal for a boost of extra power.
While I left her fiddling away, I caught Oberon in the hallway at one point and asked him point blank, "Okay, my crazy Mrasianart, what's going on? I can see it's something to do with instruments, but unless we're somehow recording a charity single, I don't quite see how it will help us." Oberon stared at me intensely, a Mrasianart quirk of trying to get another of their species to see their point of view through a form of half-hypnotism, even both we knew it didn't work on me. Oberon did it out of habit sometimes. What's the single best way of counteracting claims that off-worlders are bad for Mras, and we are better off alone? By creating the universe's first shrill multi-species band. Even before I met you, I've been dreaming of what all the different sounds I hear, one after another on the BC broadcast might sound like, playing all together, and I think they would sound pretty darn wonderful. "Oh yes," I said, hugging him, "we would be like Booker T and the MGs, or Love in the 1960s, or the Ray Ellington Quartet in the 1950s. Who? Never mind, Earth Talk. I think it's brilliant. No one is allowed to listen to my lectures, but they can't help but hear us play, some people at least. Around the universe too. Will it really work though? Will we sound right together? Will it be enough? Or will they just lock us up for good?" "Well," said Oberon, "it's the best idea I've got. And at least if we can get a recording of it to the BC and say why we're doing it, it might make people ask questions about what's going on here." "It's certainly worth a try," I said, and he went to go, but suddenly something caught my eye. "Wait, I thought I noticed it earlier. Has the aura floating around your heart space just changed colour?" Oberon looked embarrassed and muttered something about it being an involuntary Mrasianart defect. Of course, I suddenly remembered our chat after my talk at the town hall, what already seemed like several million days ago. He was in love. And wait a minute, so was I. Well, I thought to myself, at least human evolution means that I can hide my feelings, although changing colour certainly makes things a bit easier to know how the other person is thinking. It seemed a shame to leave Oberon thinking he was the only one who felt this way, and it seemed to be the right moment, and he did tell me I was brave for a human, so here goes. "I just want you to know your idea is totally brilliant. and I think you're the most amazing Mrasianart I've ever met." With that I reached in to kiss Oberon, who looked temporarily taken aback. "Ugh, I'm all wet," he said, "and with water too. Is this another Earth thing? What on Mras does that mean?" "It means I love you," I say in a small hurt voice. "Oh, I see," says Oberon, thinking really fast. Speaking a much warmer, deeper voice, he added, "Then this is me saying, I love you too." So saying, he wrapped his arms around me, pulled me towards him, and nuzzled his forehead into mine in such a way that it felt as if our heads were becoming one. As he did so, I felt a slight pinprick around my body, as if a needle was running round it. "My aura is merging with yours," he murmured. "Can you feel it?" "And how?" I said, as I felt his soul wrap itself around mine so intimately, much more so than anything I had ever experienced on Earth. Time stood still for a precious second or two, with a feeling that in a strange way seemed to last forever, and yet was never long enough. "Are you there, you two love-wazoola birds?" shouted Auntie C just then. "I think someone's at the door." "I'd better go," said Oberon, pulling himself reluctantly away from me. "But there will be more later, if you like." "I like," I said, feeling light-headed and dizzy. Somehow, even though this action was completely and utterly different, it brought out old dusty memories back into my brain I thought I had long ago forgotten, and silently I bid my apologies to the person who had once made me feel like that, both for having tried so hard to forget them, and for daring, after so many years, to start to remember them. I didn't have long to mull things over, though, as during the day Oberon's door morphed around so many people of so many different sizes that I half thought it was about to break. There were the 4 assorted Mrasianarts I had met earlier, all of them with different instruments that seemed to range in size and scale, each of them friendly and sweet. The one called Altair had additionally arrived with a huge crate of instruments that he'd wheeled in from work. There was a Belobrat named Brenda I recognised as a neighbour of Auntie C's that I had sometimes waved to, who grandly announced her entrance from outside the door whilst carrying what looked like a drum, but with an unusual drum skin I hadn't come across before. There was a Habradat named Haradudabrat, clutching an instrument that looked quite invisible, not unlike an Earth theremin. There was a Mechion called Mariana pushing what looked like a tea chest with 3 strings attached to it. Finally, even Auntie C ended up being dwarfed in size by a Dewsbury giant called Tss, who had brought along a tiny recorder-like metallic instrument to play. Through the magic of Mrasianart technology, Oberon's house expanded each time to take in these extra visitors, but even so it felt very crowded as each of us stood in a circle clutching our instruments, as Oberon himself stood in the middle, looking uncharacteristically important. It was Jeremy the Glabderhardit who turned up last, very nervously poking his head up to the door, and visibly quaking when he saw the amount of people inside, but Oberon greeted him warmly and helped usher him in. However, even when he entered with his instrument, a cross between a tuba and a harp, he disappeared straight under the table, and wouldn't come out for ages until Oberon beckoned me over, and we both went to talk to him. "Jeremy," said Oberon, "I'm so glad you're here. I know what chutzpah it took for you to turn up, so I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. This just wouldn't be a true intergalactic band without you in it, and you're the best gasplodgery player I know." Jeremy squeaked something between a "thank you" and a squeal of fear. Oberon turned to me. "Jeremy is the bravest Glabderhardit I know, Eleanor, and I've been dying for you to meet him. He might even be the bravest person in this room. He defied his planet to travel all the way here to make a new life for himself because he wanted to see the world when so many of his kind are content to live their lives sitting under tables, waiting to be conquered. I prithee that I was 100th as brave as Jeremy." I held out my hand and touched his furry paw. "I'm so thrilled to meet you. Your instrument looks amazing too. I can't wait to hear it."
"You're amongst friends here, Jeremy,"
cried Alioth.
"and this gathering wouldn't be the same without you."
Slowly, gradually, Jeremy pulled himself out from under the table bit by bit until he was joining in the raucous laughter and bonhomie. At one point he very shyly handed me an earth guitar next to him that I recognised had been ordered from home and sent for one of my lectures, to which I was grateful, so I gave him a hug, much to his alarm as he backed away from me and fell over a whole bank of alien instruments. Oddly, the crash was strangely musical, and that was the first time I began to get the feeling that actually this idea of Oberon's might actually work. Finally we were ready for this historic moment of intergalactic importance, a new band waiting to play, and the first time ever all those instruments from all those planets would be heard together, at once. "Now then," Oberon said, "we all know why we're here, and I'm half afraid that our impromptu rehearsal will get broken up any minute, so let's get as far as we can before we are. Everybody get set to play your H note." "Wait, what the deuce? Not every species has an H note? That's interesting." "All right then, we'll start with C. Let's have a bash at warming up and see how we sound. Everybody ready?" The sound that came was impossible to describe, simply because there were so many dimensions to it, and it was nothing like I had ever heard before. It was as if the sound came in extra dimensions compared to anything else, as if I had just gone from mono sound to quadraphonic in one small move. One split second it was high-pitched and wavery, ethereal. The next it was deep and loud and echoed round Oberon's house. In between those two sounds my ear was caught by all sorts of other sounds, a rattling, metallic, percussive sound, a reed-like warble, a sort of shimmering, hazy wobbling, a synthesized artificial robotic bleep, a throaty animalistic roar, a blues jazz cry of pain that seemed to be forever trying to reach up to the stars but was being pulled back down to the ground, and a sort of angelic fizz that exploded into bursts of heavenly floating music. In the middle of all this, I somehow remembered to play my guitar, and plucked away until the music in the room fell away to silence. There was a hush as we all looked around at each other, some of our instruments still vibrating. "Well," said Oberon eventually, beaming, "that was up to stuff, I would say. Should we try a full song next? Don't worry if you don't know it. I've chosen a simple one most of you here know, and if you don't, just do your best to improvise along. It's an oldie from centuries ago, and we first discovered another inhabited planet at Mechion 5, but I think it's kind of appropriate." A tune everyone played I half recognised as a melody from being played on the telescreens, a rousing mid-tempo number that sounded not like a national anthem from Earth. Some of the Mrasianarts in the room, including Oberon, sang along, but not those who were playing instruments with their mouths, of course. Rather than have lyrics about being superior, or going to war, or fighting for your rights, or being God-given rights to kill the French, however, the lyrics were full of thoughts about peace and equality and understanding.
Reach in for inner wisdom to help heal our minds, to understand so that we might better aid as we heal ourselves more love we can pour till we find a new world we've made.
This is our world. It's your world too if you want it. We share what we have with you if you share what you have with us. This is our life. We'd like to learn from you. If you are open to learning from it, we accept your differences without any fuss. We reach across with a helping wing to help you on your long journey. As we pull, we help you push us along too. We learn better together. Hope we'll be friends forever. But light years apart, we all share the same roof. That was so way out it came with its own exit sign. Of course, said Oberon, as we got our breath back, quite literally in some cases. For those of you who don't know the story, it didn't quite go according to plan. The Mechions arrived, tried to buy our planet and colonise us that way, and when we refused, sent in an army. That didn't end well for them, though. They could never penetrate our universal, and we just ignored them and carried on as normal until they left. We're good friends now, we understand each other more. My dears, said Auntie C, that was wonderful, brilliant, amazing, stupendous, splendiferous. I've never been much of a one for music. My Mytholodium is more of a family heirloom, but to hear music like that has made a new convert of me. To think we can make a noise that big from just 13 of us. This is so exciting. We'll show those monsters in charge, but we don't need to be afraid of each other, but we can work together in peace.
I thought that was amazing, especially my part,
said Brenda. It was groovy, agreed Oberon. Out of sight. Jubilar. We haven't been arrested yet either, I whispered to Oberon as we took a break. And that was so loud. Is your house soundproof? Not given the amount of noise I hear from people stumbling back from the club every night, he grinned. I'll just go and have a peep outside. Good grief. What is it? The room asked in wobbly unison. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our first audience. We all peeped out to see what must have been 50 Mrasianarts all gathered together on Oberon's lawn, as far as the human eye could see.
Let's play something else for them,
said Hadrid Odradrat, and Oberon began going round the room taking notes on songs. The more political yet peaceful the better, he said. We went through as many as we could, more falteringly than the last song, as many of them were more complicated. That night we played a Belobrat tune entitled Stop What You're Doing and Listen to Me, as you know in your heart of hearts I'm right. The Clandusprods ditty, 3 suns will shine on you before I'm through. The Glabdahardit tune, Please don't drop that nuclear weapon on me, go and drop it on yourself. The Habridat song, Once We Lived in Peace, but the universe had other ideas. The Mechion track, Get Away From Me, I'm Contagiously Peaceful. The Dewsbury Giant contributed the song, We May Be Big, but Our Problems Are So Small. And I threw in the John Lennon classic, Give Peace a Chance, secretly wondering what the Beatle might have felt if he'd known his song was being sung by 8 different species on an alien planet. I even added the verse that had been composed in the 21st century. Everybody's talking about Clandusprods, Oddbods, Belobrats, Nice New Hats, Mrasianarts, Jamtarts, Dewsburys, Gooseberries, Mechions, Schmechions, Camelosians, Oldetonians, Magrumps, Measles and Mumps, Habridats. What do you make of that? It was great fun. Whichever of us was from the planet with the song, they took charge in teaching it to the others. Well, they heard each piece through once, and they gradually started adding their own ideas to it, embellishments here and there, until we were really meshing as a band. We all had very different styles. Bettina was rather dictatorial, Jeremy and rather shy, Mariana very dispassionate and technological, treated it all as great fun. Auntie C looked a little lost, and I was somewhere in between. Oberon, meanwhile, kept us all together like a favourite teacher who wants to have fun with you, but still knows you need to study for your exams. But the result was the same, and we mastered the songs in no time. We were just beginning to sing the Mrasianart comedy song, My Aura Likes Your Aura, when we heard a commotion outside and a banging on the door. Oh dear, sighed Oberon, trouble's arrived. We don't have a police force as such, but I heard tell that Albethea was sending Mrasianarts out looking for public nuisances. That's not tickety-boo. Halfway through the door he walked outside before we could stop him, and he puffed himself up to full size. Officer, you're here! I would like to report an assault that happened outside the town hall the other night. I trust you've come to tell me that you've arrested the perpetrators, and they've all had their extra stories taken off them.
Actually, we've come about a disturbance emanating through this here property,
the grumpy-looking Mrasianart said. I didn't hear a disturbance, said Oberon, playing up to the crowd of Mrasianarts, who now numbered at least 500. Did you? Oh, I heard a bit of music, but as it was on my own property, I don't think anyone could call that a disturbance. The crowd agreed with cries of shame, how dare you, and get on with your job, arresting criminals.
The so-called music may well have disturbed other local residents.
Go and ask them, said Oberon. I'll wait. I shouldn't think any of them either heard or minded. I mean, there's no need to flip your wig or have a cow or anything.
I don't know what any of that off-worlder talk means,
said the officer.
But stop making such a din. Now, or else.
Oberon went to walk back into the house, and as he turned I noticed he was shaking slightly.
One more thing. Are you harbouring an assailant who originated from Earth in there? We have a warrant for her arrest for an unprovoked attack on some innocent citizens.
No, lied Oberon edgily, but I can tell you for certain that it was most definitely provoked. You forget I was there and saw what happened.
You wouldn't allow us to search your property, would you, sir?
No, I wouldn't, said Oberon, as carelessly as he could. Anything else?
We'll be watching.
I'd rather you were listening. Oberon shouted after them as they walked to go, and he ran back to the door and more through it. I was nearest the door and fell on him. Thank you, Oberon, you were amazing. The rest of the assorted musicians murmured their agreement and patted him on the back, the Dewsbury Giant apologising after accidentally sending Oberon flying across the room.
The way you stood up to them, Oberon, you were so brave,
said Jeremy from under a table.
Even so, I think that might be the end of our band practice.
Oberon looked more dazed than triumphant. There's nothing in the rules that says I have to let them in, or that I can't create as much noise as I like in my own home. After all, the way air works on Mars, there's very little noise pollution, as they well know. We would have to be making a bigger racket than that. I just hope they don't come back having changed the rules. We didn't dare play again or leave Oberon's house for hours, just in case. Instead we sat around talking, and it was a valuable chance to get to know the other species I hadn't met yet. The general chat amongst us off-worlders became why we first moved to Mras. Despite his rather frightening appearance, I really liked the Dewsbury Giant, who was gentle and sweet and seemed most concerned for my well-being. He'd come to Mras out of a feeling of restlessness and had aimed to travel the universe before falling in love with the planet and wanting to settle down. He'd even put up with the Mras food dispensers to come here, which, as I knew full well, were a bit unreliable. Brenda the Belobrat insisted on telling me her entire life story, anecdote by anecdote, and how she came to Mras. It turns out she was an astronomer who grew tired of her planet Helisphere's insistence that they were the centre of the universe. Coming to Mras was, she said, a revelation, and where her character traits of modesty and humility weren't constantly being mocked by her peers. I grew very fond of her too. She was funny and brave and acted like a big sister towards me. Jeremy the Glabderhardit explained that his planet was too full of action, adventure and energy for him, and he'd come to settle down somewhere much quieter so that he could think and write a book, though so far he hadn't got past the first page.
That page scary!
Harriet the Habridat gave me a long and detailed explanation of her journey across worlds and how she was one of many reporters from her planet who were now living on alien worlds. I wrote back detailed reports every so often.
You wait till I tell them about this orchestra. It's going to knock my readers out, man. Fab groovy.
Mariana the Mechion said that she had first come to Mras as part of a trade negotiation on technology. Mechion 5 were trying to sell to the Mrasianarts, only she had fallen in love with the place and its people and applied to live here decades ago, becoming Mras' first off-worlder. Auntie C filled us in about not fitting in on Ziggurat 3 and her longing to travel. I also talked to the Mrasianarts. They told me how much they had loved their planet, but that it had been better still in centuries gone by, before the existence of other inhabited planets had shaken them collectively and led to an increasing series of questionable governments.
It's awful,
said Astrophel.
So many people seem to be fooled by what's going on, most of the ones who've never met an off-worlder in their life.
And the other Mrasianarts all nodded. At least being so close to the Kolawallabula Club, you get to meet all sorts at work, said Oberon. That really changed my way of thinking. Not that I ever thought the way the bulletins wanted me to. One thing I noticed was that despite the bulletins being given out in the Universal, each one of us loved this world and was proud to call it home, even if each of us had doubts about the future and how long we might yet get to call Mras home. As for me, I managed to stay quiet about my motives for moving to Mras and murmured something about how it seemed nice.
Things seem to have come to a head this week,
said Aliath.
What in Mras happened outside the town hall?
Oberon recounted the story as I added bits he'd forgotten, and the others were shocked.
Quick thinking there, human,
said Altair, while Zzz patted me lightly on the back, which was still strong enough to send me flying across the room. Just then we were interrupted with another bulletin, to collective groans from around the room. What this time? Why can't they leave us alone? To our surprise, they didn't mention our impromptu performance. Instead, we got a development we weren't expecting.
Citizens, the latest figures are in, and they are good, even with the voluntary working hours. Do you realise that the Grumpus outsold us for exports last semester? Or that Mechion 5 made far greater profits than we did? Even that backwater planet Earth is catching up with us fast. We need to work better, faster, harder. As a result, I'm extending the voluntary working hours across the board so that everyone gets to take part.
So much for being voluntary then, Oberon sighed. What twaddle.
And we expect every citizen to do his or her duty, including off-worlders.
I laugh at this. What am I expected to do when they stop me from doing the job I was doing? Dig ditches? S spoke up.
I hope not. My body is very fragile.
Altair concluded.
It's always been the way on this planet. The work is there if you want it and care about that sort of thing. And if you don't, your time is your own to think and philosophise and help your people out that way. It's always been the Mrasianart way. Till now, anyway, said Oberon grimly.
A hush descended on the room.
So, what do we do now?
Squeaked Jeremy. We go ahead with our rehearsals, said Oberon. Hopefully at the club, starting tomorrow for anyone who's free. We need to get as many rehearsals in as possible before we end up spending all our time working for a government that hates us. I sent off 2 universal mails before any of you got here, explaining what we hope to do, and sent it off to both the Intergalactic Federation and the BCBC. With any luck, the former should come rushing to our aid, and the latter should help publicise our need by broadcasting our performance once we're ready. Now, is there anything else we can do that might help? I've got an idea, I said, though it might not work. So far we've sung songs written by members of each of our planets about events we've protested about individually. Well, how about we write one between ourselves about our plight now, one we've all had a hand in? That would give us something to do before going home anyway. Brilliant, said Oberon. It will be just like the Endurance collaboration, but in music form, not a book. There was an appreciative murmur at this, and we ended up working on a new song one line at a time, passing it around the room until each of us had written a couple of lines each, and all chipped in for the ending. though Oberon ended up liaising between us and rewriting a lot of it.
We are all one planet, and we're only 28 billion light years apart. Belobrat, Clandusprods, human, Mrasianart, Clandusprods, Magrup, Habitat, London, Mrasianart. We all have one thing in common, a sense of belonging in this universe in which everyone's a part. No more national anthems full of war, planets fighting and wondering what for. We all share a need to care that reaches much further down to the core. Though our leaders talk of profiting more, they need to beat the neighbours and succeed. What we need the most is to be guests in everyone's house and learn from them. That's what we need. Everything we have, we gladly share with our friends and any strangers who are still out there. We are stronger together, our conscience light as a feather on the back of an indescribable bear. We sing with pride, we sing with hope, for without peace we cannot cope. We stretch out the wings and burn hand across the universe and land. Will we ever stop our song? No. If we have to for peace we will fight. We will help our brothers and sisters on side. We are one, peace or sing the song, for it's the people, not the politicians, who are right.
Suddenly, though, I began to have doubts. I was sort of asking everyone to put their lives, or at least their freedom, on the line, while they had all been getting around in this world fine without me. Do you think it's a little bit charity-singly? I asked nervously after we were finished. Not that any of you will get the reference, but I've awful visions of Bob Geldof singing it with an all-star cast against a backdrop of film featuring universal suffering. Well, it's heartfelt, said Oberon. That's what matters most, I think.
No, dear, said Auntie C. I think it's rather good. It says what we want it to say anyway.
I really like it,
said humming a few bars in a deep voice.
My bits are brilliant,
said Brenda. After that we realised that it was late and that the coast was probably clear, so we all said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, Auntie C handing everyone a hat with the colours of every one of the 10 planets in it which she had been busy knitting during the night. I marvelled again at how quickly the house shrunk as everyone morphed through the door. Oberon, though, approached me and asked me rather sweetly if I would stay. I would worry about you too much if I didn't know where you were, he said. Plus, if someone comes around to beat me up, I'm going to need you here for my protection. I still felt a sense of unease, as if I was in the process of tying up something that would never be undone, and I would have to live with for the rest of my life. I'd be glad to if you really want me to, but only if you're sure, I say. Of course I'm sure, said Oberon. I'm not my government. This home is yours now, for as long as you want it. Are you really sure? You don't fully know me. It's all happened so fast. I've already turned your world upside down without meaning to. Oberon pressed his forehead against mine and whispered in my ear. You forget, I do know you. I'm a Mrasianart. I sense everything. I knew when I met you that this would happen. Believe me, it's a price worth paying. Not everything, I said quickly. You still don't really know why I'm here. Because of something bad, Eleanor. Something bad that you couldn't really help. I nodded sadly. Then I do know, and I don't need to know any more than that, until you want to tell me. I'm just afraid of you getting hurt, I stammer. Those close to me, they always seem to get hurt. And are you the ones that hurt them? Not directly, I admit. Then this is a fresh start. New planet, new life, new boyfriend perhaps. New rules apply. Maybe no one will get hurt this time. And if they do, it won't all be because of you. That's not fair though. I shouldn't have to bleed all over you because something in the past cut me. That's totally fair. It's what love is. I feel closer to you when you bleed. I don't pretend that I will ever be able to fix you, but I will protect you and hold your tools for you while you learn to slowly fix yourself. We should do our best to help each other and heal each other where we can, as long as we know the other can't save us from the hurt that festers or wave a magic wand to make it go away, only help us recover from it. The only thing I ask is that you don't cut me in turn out of fear. I ask you again, and you are free to answer however you wish, with no pressure from me ever. Would you like to stay? Taking Oberon by the wing, I smiled. Oh, I'll just stay forever then. Is that okay? Fine by me. Don't I have to, I don't know, meet your parents, your Mrasian grandparent or something first? I asked hesitantly. Well, you've already met him. He was impressed by you. Even I did have to explain that your lecture was about planet Earth, not bandit smurfs, as he'd never heard of you. And no, not really. I've pointed you out on the Universal, and we've chatted, and they seem pleased. That's enough. I haven't seen them in person myself for a long time. Oh, that's good. You can meet them properly if you like, but we might feel that a bit weird if we go out of our way to do it. No doubt we'll bump into them somewhere. It's a small world after all, much smaller than yours. You don't tend to make many direct connections when you're a Mrasianart. That's one of the things I love about you most, Eleanor. The lack of distance between us from the first time we met. Well, maybe the second, thinking about it. Oh, that lack of distance compared to the other Mrasianarts is one of the things I love about you, Oberon. If I was at home, you'd be getting me drunk, or taking advantage of me, or trying to sleep with me. I much prefer the Mrasianart customs to the earthly ones. At least we don't have the awful earth custom of taking you to see the in-laws. Mine live a bit far away for that, though I might well send a hologram back with my next parcel home, if you don't mind. What are they like? Well, they're nice enough for humans, but a little stuck in the past century, you know. Their priorities are all kind of wrong. When I sat them down and told them I was making the decision to move here permanently, instead of being upset or angry or happy for me, they asked me what I was going to wear on the shuttle, as if that was the only thing that mattered. Not where I was going to live, or how I was going to pay for it, or what I would eat, or if I get lonely, or what they would do without me there for the rest of our lives. Just what I was going to wear, and what I would look like, meaning how would other species judge me, and how would it reflect upon them. Living on other worlds wasn't an option when they were growing up, so for them it's still not an option for anybody, and especially not for me. It's as if they're stuck with their narrow views of a narrow time on a narrow world. They've never looked up from the earth to see the sky all around them, and the wondrous possibilities of what could be. But I didn't want to live my life like that any more. So you came here because of them? Not just them, everybody. It feels like Edwin and Lizzie briefly brought all 10 planets together in this new understanding of what it was like to live alongside each other, shoulder to shoulder in this universe, and that we could be helping each other, and then gradually we all stopped caring, and went back into our own bubbles of what was familiar and safe. Except for you and me and Auntie C and the other off-worlders here, and a handful of other people I know back home who never got the chance to travel. It is as if we were offered this glorious present and we were too afraid to open it, so we just went back to what we knew. Oberon thought about this for a minute, the way Mrasianarts would tend to do, then laughed. You know, if you ever get made to work voluntarily, there's an opening up on the corner for a new teller. You should go for it. The world's first deep-thinking Earthwoman. I laughed too. Complete with Mrasianarts and the Universal. Yeah, right. Oberon then became serious. In a way you should, you know. You have a perspective on the universe that's largely unique, having travelled all the way out here. We know about some of the 10 planets long before Edwin and Lizzie, though the Earth was seen as a closed planet back then, of course, so we didn't know much about you. We've although forgotten what it must have been like to live in isolation for all those millennia, and then discover you with all those neighbours out there waiting to say hello. It doesn't hurt to be reminded about things like that from time to time. I laughed the idea off. I can't see Mrasianarts queuing for advice from a backward ape somehow. Maybe not as things are, but maybe in the future. You have a lot you can tell us. I hope you give a chance one day. I smiled up gratefully. To think I thought I was going to be alone when I came to this planet. Thank you, Oberon. I really do love you, more than you will ever know. And I you, Eleanor. More than that, I indulge you. Well, if you're ready, there's one thing I have to do to make things official. House From now on, this property is officially shared by Mras resident Eleanor, who can count this abode as her second property, who will always be welcome here, and who can come and go as she pleases, even when I'm not there. I smiled gratefully and gave Oberon such a big hug he thought it was going to squeeze him to death. "I didn't know humans could be that strong," he said, gasping. I just grinned again, the happiest I'd been in ever such a long time. Though I'd had a home already, it was a kind of basic low-budget collection of bricks that the Mras government could get away with. This time, though, I really felt like I had a house, and not just a house, but a home. Somebody needed and wanted me, and I'd forgotten how good that felt. Outside on Mras was still a little scary, with unknown dangers that lurked, and even my own house had felt empty and strange, a weak facsimile of what I had on Earth. Here, though, here was the life I had always dreamed of living, and by being able to close my own door every night, well, that in turn opened so many to me. I was a true citizen now, a resident, sharing a home with somebody who wanted me there. To think I actually belonged somewhere. In that moment, I knew that the long journey to Mras had been worth it, that I had come to the right place.